Game of Thrones, the scheming Baratheon. Greetings, fellow multiversal adventurers. It's an honor to have you back in this saga that has us all hooked. Official channel statement, this story is 100% epic fiction. So please don't attempt real magic, the results aren't guaranteed and insurance won't cover it. The rights to this masterpiece belong entirely to its brilliant original author. We are just a barge sharing it with you. Do you want to keep being part of this amazing community? Join our ninja army of subscribers on YouTube and give this content a like. And for true fans, our Patreon has exclusive ninjutsu waiting for you. Chapter 26, Edward's Viciousness. Excuse me, Your Highness. But why have you asked for me? I don't think that we have interaction before. As you might know, I took this vacation to let my mother have some rest, and we would have to go back soon. Said Edward with a fake friendly smile, but inside his heart, he was viciously cursing Rhaegar as always. He was telling Rhaegar in his heart, just fucking hurry up. We do not have the whole day for you two. Edward would always be Edward. Regardless of who is the man in front of him, he would still say what was on his mind. Although he toned the viciousness of his words, his polite words still hurt one again. Rhaegar's men were mad. Arthur Dayne's hand was already on the handle of his sword. It was as if he would lose control soon and take out his sword to attack Edward. He really hated anyone that disrespected his close friend, Rhaegar. As for Jon, he was gritting his teeth as much as he could. How dare a brat disrespect the man he loved? He wanted to cut Edward to pieces to vent his anger to Barristan, who knew a little about Edward's personality, could only shake his head. He was ready for this. Edward was always arrogant and rude with his words. He also did not care about who the man standing in front of him was. Although Edward toned it down, he was still a little disrespectful. Haha, you are like what everyone described. And I had to admit that everyone was right calling you vicious. Said Rhaegar while still smiling. He heard a lot about Edward's personality, and he could finally see it with his own eyes. Well, every talented man was unique. He thought that this might what made Edward unique in everyone's eyes. Haha, thank you, Your Highness. It's just our Baratheon's bloodline. I could not hold my words and I would always say what is on my mind. Said Edward with a fake smile after his mother gave him a death glare. Oh, come on. Are you going to be like this the whole time? Thought Edward as he looked at his mother, speechless. She had been giving him this glare every time he opened his mouth. So, what do you need, Your Highness? Said Edward, trying to end this meeting as soon as possible. He would not gain anything from this meeting after all. It was his last vacation as he would be the Lord after that. He did not want to waste any more time with Rhaegar. Rhaegar nodded his head. He also did not want to be indirect, so he decided to tell Edward directly what was on his mind. Well, Lord Baratheon. As you can see, I know you are a smart person, and I could use your help. I need someone with your talent beside me. I know you are very bright and intelligent. You could help a lot of people said Rhaegar before he was interrupted by Edward. Well, I apologize, Your Grace, but I have to refuse. Interrupted Edward. He did not even let the prince finish his words. He was not going to listen to all this shit about helping the people and improving life. One work for you. Is Rhaegar crazy or something? After everything that I had done and all the preparation that I made to enter the game, and you want me to go by your side? I am not crazy, am I? Thought Edward while mocking Rhaegar in his head. He was going to fuck with Rhaegar himself, and the other side was trying to get him by his side. Edward was going to overthrow the Targaryens' rule by himself if needed. He wanted the exciting life that came after it. He was not going to waste his reincarnation. Was Edward going to throw all that just for Rhaegar? If Rhaegar was a pretty girl with big tits, Edward might give it some thoughts, but he was not. And he was trying to persuade him using the small folks as if Edward cared about them. Edward just saw them as tools that he could use against others or being used against him by others. So, of course, he would refuse such a stupid offer, even if he got himself killed. Cassandra, hearing her son cutting Rhaegar in the middle of his talk and refusing his offer at that, turned pale. She was afraid that the prince was offended by Edward and would hurt her son. She looked at her son trying to make him give the prince some face, but Edward never responded to her. Yet, Edward was good to Cassandra as long as she did not affect his goal and did not try to hinder him, but the first second she tried something that might affect him or his plans, he was ready to abandon her or kill her himself if necessary. To be a schemer, you must have nothing that could threaten you, or everyone would target your weakness to hurt you. 7. You might ask, does that mean he would not care about anyone and would be bloodthirsty to even his wife and children? My answer is no. He would not allow the people he cares about to leave the castle till they can protect themselves. Or else, he would better imprison them so they would not be used against him by others. 7. After Edward sensed his mother's stare, he shifted his eyes towards her and gave her the death glare. Cassandra was stunned for a moment before snapping out of it and withdrawing her hands. She sensed what she did was out of the line, because firstly, this was Edward's decision. It was his life, after all, and she should not interfere in a situation like that. And that was because if Edward involved himself with a prince, the whole of Storm's Lands would have to be involved with him, as he was the future Lord of Storm's End. Secondly, by doing such an act, she made Edward lose face in front of everyone present. She made him look like the amateur and childish that would need his mother's opinion before making a decision. Knowing all that, all Cassandra could do was to lower her head. She knew she had messed up a lot this time. Edward did not even turn his head to reassure Cassandra and kept looking in the prince's eyes as if he did not care about anything in the world. His eyes shifted between the prince and everyone in the tent. It was as if he was looking at a prey that he was ready to hunt. His eyes emitted a silent killing intent that made them afraid deep within. Chapter 27. Edward befriended Rhaegar. Everyone in the tent, seeing this, was shocked. Edward was able to pressure them with just a look of his eyes. They also were surprised by the interaction between the mother and the son. They saw the silent treatment that Edward gave his mother, and that made them more shocked. They did not imagine that Edward would be even cruel to his mother. That meant that whatever they did, Edward would not change his mind. He was going to refuse Rhaegar's offer either way. "Could I know your reason for refusing?" asked Rhaegar after taking a long breath to calm himself. He still asked with his usual friendly smile, trying to lighten the mood that became heavy all of a sudden. He wanted to know why Edward would refuse his offer, as many would die trying to get close to him. 1. I already had Storm's Lands to worry about, and I do not have the energy to care about the rest of the 7 kingdoms. Storm's Lands still need a lot of work, and I am not going to abandon my people for the rest of the 7 kingdoms, said Edward with his calm tone. His goal was one and only. Developing Storm's Lands was his short and long goal so that he could enter the Game of Thrones. Storm's Land was his base, and he still needed to turn it into a fort so that he could attack and retreat to it. Plus, he already felt humiliation when he bowed to Rhaegar earlier, so how could he allow himself to serve under any man in the future? He was already preparing a way out for himself during the rebellion, as he would never allow himself to bend the knee to Robert V. Well, that is unfortunate. But I still hope to be friends with you. I wish I could consult you in the future. Would that be fine with you? Said Rhaegar while trying to console himself. He wanted to build a talented team that would help him when he ruled the 7 kingdoms. And Edward would be great as his hand, as Edward was an all-rounder that could help him develop the 7 kingdoms and their armies. The Iron Throne would turn into its most glorious era under his rule. Sure, my prince. There is no reason for me to refuse such an attractive offer and be a friend of the prince. You can find me any time, said Edward as he stretched his hand to shake hands with Rhaegar's. He did not want to be more disrespectful than that. That was why he agreed to Rhaegar's request. That would already perfect for Edward's goal. He wanted to be somewhat close to Rhaegar for his future plan to work, and Rhaegar's offer was the ideal chance for that. Edward could use Rhaegar in many different ways. Edward could ask the prince for some favors. Rhaegar would see it as a chance to attract Edward towards his side and would help him. But all that Edward was going to do was misguiding him and betray him in the end. Rhaegar smiled and shook hands with Edward. Although that was not what he wanted, at least he made the first contact. In the future, he might be able to persuade Edward to be his hand. Edward was secretly smiling in his heart while seeing Rhaegar's expression. "Oh, you are so fucked, my dear friend. I am going to cuckold you if I could, use you, and take everything from you little by little. I may have different thoughts in the future about Lyanna. Just wait," thought Edward to himself while laughing secretly. 3. The men in the room were not happy about this. They saw Edward as the disrespectful man who refused their prince's general offer, especially John Connington and Arthur Dane. Well, the Connington house was already having a lot of problems with the Baratheon. And since the Baratheons were the lords of Storm's Land, the Conningtons were suppressed completely. They had to rely on Rhaegar and kiss his ass to favor them over their rival house, House Morgan. As for Arthur, he was Rhaegar's close friend, and Rhaegar trusted his friend very much. Rhaegar even trusted him more than Sir Barristan Selmy. So, of course, he was going to be mad at anyone who disrespected his friend. Although in reality, Edward did not insult Rhaegar. The young man, Edward, only wanted to develop himself. He did not want to serve under Rhaegar. But to the die-hard fans of Rhaegar, refusing the prince's offer was an insult in itself. Edward did not really like Arthur Dayne's personality. The man helped Rhaegar with his plan to take Lyanna. He participated in the plan without saying anything to Rhaegar. As if kidnapping Lyanna was not going to throw the kingdoms into chaos. If not for his sister Ashera and his brilliance in using the swords, Edward would not give him another thought. Edward would want Arthur to be one of his men for only his sword skills, but since he knew his personality and character from the show, he decided against it. The man's dream was to be one of the king's guard, so even if Edward did all that he could, Edward still would not get Arthur to his side. Plus, Arthur would have met Prince Rhaegar by the time he was able to recruit his men. Edward ignored Arthur and Jon's hostility and talked a little more with the prince. Rhaegar started laughing while telling Edward about some places that he visited. Edward was not a miser either. He started telling him about the area, some ideals, and the battles he experienced. Of course, Edward would not tell him secrets or details about all this. He just told Rhaegar what the Small folks knew but from his perspective. Well, pardon me, Your Grace. But I would have to take my leave. We still had a long way to reach the area, said Edward with a fake smile that looked friendly on the surface and a sinister inside one. He already talked for half an hour with the prince and thought that was enough for the first meeting. Edward did not have any use for Rhaegar at the moment, so why would he keep Rhaegar's company for that long? He decided to end their meeting with some laughter. That was why he stayed for that long. It was nice knowing you, Edward. I hope I could see you again, soon, said the prince while nodding his head. Rhaegar felt that his trip to find Edward was not useless after sitting down and making a conversation with him. He really liked Edward's personality, although Edward was cold and distant. Rhaegar felt that if he could make Edward open up to him and make him a close friend, that would be the best decision he ever made. Then he would be able to make use of Edward's talent. Rhaegar was not naive and knew that Edward was ambitious. That could be seen by everyone when Edward refused his offer and preferred to rule over Stormsland than serving under him as his hand. Well, Rhaegar was trusting in general, but he would not provoke a wolf. Rhaegar and Tywin's behavior was an example. Although Tywin was a talented individual with a great mind and talent, Rhaegar did not try to get close to him. But instead, he was cautious towards Tywin. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 28, Edward's Value. Rhaegar just thought that Edward was young and did not have great schemes like Tywin. Even if Edward had been a talented young man when it came to Tywin, who had the talent and the experience, Edward would lose. Everyone with a head over his shoulder could see that Edward was still not an opponent of Tywin. It was made clear by what happened in the last accident when Edward fell into Tywin's traps and nearly got himself killed by the assassins. They thought Edward was young and a little arrogant like all the youngsters. Well, everyone knew it was Tywin's doing. No one in all Westeros had the money to hire the faceless men or those proficient assassins other than the Lannisters. So, yeah, every player in the game already knew who sent them. Only Stefan did not realize or wanted to believe that his old friend wanted to hurt his son. So Rhaegar thought that he could tame Edward and made use of his talent. He was planning to attract Edward to his side little by little, and when he was finally the king of the Seven Kingdoms, Edward would be his hand. Well, Rhaegar underestimated Edward's abilities a little, as everyone did. Yes, indeed, Edward fell into Tywin's trap, but Edward knew about it. And the only reason he fell for it was his arrogance that caused that situation, and he decided to tone it down. Edward would never put down his guard again. He was like his men. After the assassination, he was cautious about every detail. If Edward knew that his reputation got ruined by the assassination, he would get a little mad. He would get angry at himself when he remembered that he was the reason for fucking up. But it was also good news for him, as many would underestimate him again, and he could fuck them up when the game's calculations started again. I wish to see you again soon, Your Grace, said Edward as he left the tent with his mother. It was finally over. In the meeting, he had to act humbly, and that was against his character. Edward's words were always vicious, and he liked to let his tongue speak freely. But he decided to be patient. The Roman did not build Rome in one day. After Edward left the tent, Rhaegar took a long breath, then turned to the men inside the tent. Those men were his most trusted men, and he always valued their opinions. "Well, what do you think of the young Lord Baratheon?" asked Rhaegar with his calm smile. During their talk, Edward gave him some advice to solve some problems, although they were not critical problems and would not give Rhaegar the ability to affect the situation that much. But they were good nonetheless. Edward only did, though, to show Rhaegar his value. He wanted to make Rhaegar seek his advice so that Edward could make full use of Rhaegar till the rebellion. It was not like Edward would accept Rhaegar's offer, but Edward wanted to choose multiple paths for himself. He would be able to use Rhaegar in the future. "I know what you want to hear, Your Grace. But I am still standing with my previous opinion regarding Edward, that he is a cunning man. He could do more harm than help. He is also very ambitious," said Sir Barristan after taking a long breath and sighing. He knew what Rhaegar wanted to hear, as Edward was truly talented and his unconventional thinking of solving the problems was unheard of before. But Barristan still thought that Edward was too dangerous to be trusted. He was afraid that Edward would use Rhaegar to benefit himself and cause problems for Rhaegar in the future. "One, he is disrespectful as ever. I heard about his vicious tongue and disrespectful words towards Lord Tywin in the past and did not believe it. But seeing him in action is another thing," replied Sir Miles. He was a little annoyed at Edward for disrespecting the prince. But he had to respect his talent, and from what he had heard about him from Sir Barristan, he should be a great fighter too. "Well, I think his talent is the real deal, Your Grace. If we ignored his character, he would be a good lord and do great as your hands in the future," said Sir Richard. He did not want to badmouth Edward. The man would be the Lord of Stormsland, and his house was under the man's rule. "What are you all saying? We should have killed him when he was disrespectful to the prince. Whatever talent he has, I do not think we should recruit him. I do not believe we would not be able to find a good talent like his in the future," said Jon with an angry voice. He loved the prince, and how dare that brat to speak disrespectfully towards their prince. He was the one with the most hate and refusal towards Edward. Rhaegar heard their opinions and thought for some time. He then remembered that his close friend, Arthur, did not say anything. So the prince shifted his towards the Silent Knight. "What about you, Arthur? I did not hear your opinion," said the prince. He wanted to hear Arthur's opinion especially. It was because his close friend always spoke the truth and with logic, without letting his emotions affect his judgment. He is a man with great talent, and he is still young. He could serve the Seven Kingdoms for a long time. We would not be able to find a talent like him in the whole Seven Kingdoms. He only needs to perfect his troublesome personality," said the knight with a calm tone. Although he was angry at Edward for disrespecting the prince, he still gave his honest opinion. He would not let his emotions affect his decision. He wanted to choose what might benefit the prince in the future. So, although Edward's personality was not to his liking, Edward's talent was unique for them to ignore. Rhaegar nodded his head. That was, exactly, what was in his mind. Regardless of his personality, Edward had a great talent that could help him develop the Seven Kingdoms, for so, Rhaegar decided to ignore Edward's personality for now. It was not like he would be the king the next day or something. And Edward would be the Lord of Stormsland, so his character might change when he ruled the land. Rhaegar decided to take his time when it came to Edward and see if Edward was really suitable as his hand. Everything would clear out in the future. Chapter 29, Apology. While all that was happening, Edward was in the wagon with his mother. The wagon decided to make a detour around Hayford Castle to avoid any spies. Edward was not ready to be dragged to the Targaryen shit this early, so he took some precautions. Edward was still giving his mother the cold shoulder. He was not going to talk to her for some time. And since Edward did not want such a situation to happen again, Edward had to do this. He was ready to abandon her if she really became an obstacle in his way. Call him cold-blooded all you want. But in front of his goal and glorious life, he was ready to do that. Just imagine that he would be the king of the Seven Kingdoms and his sons after him. For such a future, he would do anything. Tywin, himself, was doing all this to make his grandson the king. His grandson would take of the House Lannister after Tywin was not there to protect them. So why would Edward not do more for his future? Meanwhile, inside the carriage, Cassandra had an absent look on her face. Cassandra knew she had done something that she, as his mother, should not have done, but what could she do? She was afraid that her son's life would be in danger for refusing the prince's offer. And she did what every mother would have done in her place. But all she got was her son's angry eyes. He even refused to talk to her till now. Cassandra did not know what she could do. It was the first time that her son, Edward, was angry at her. Edward had never done such a thing before. Instead, he would always smile and make a sarcastic comment here and there. She was usually seen by everyone laughing while she was around her son. The maidservants did not know what had happened back there in the tent. They did not know why their lady's mood, suddenly, became worse. Their lady was laughing and enjoying her time just before she went with their young lord to the prince's tent. The maidservants did not know what to do to cheer their lady. All they could do, for now, was to accompany her in silence. The road kept to silence till a week and a half later when they reached the Eyrie. During their journey, they visited all the locations that Edward had wanted to investigate. Though the rest of the road was dull, Edward was able to inspect House Wend, who helped Rhaegar kidnap Lyanna. Edward had sent a word earlier to Lord Arryn that he was coming to the Eyrie with his mother. That was the reason why Lord Arryn waited for them in front of the gate. It had been some time since he saw Stefan and his wife, Cassana. Of course, Robert would not miss his mother's arrival. He cared about his parents. That was a trait that he exceeded Edward in. But Edward did not care. He would care for his mother in his own way. Did he save his mother from her death? Welcome to the Eyrie, Lady Cassana. It had been a long time since we saw each other, said the old Lord Arryn with a calm voice. It was indeed a long time. The last time he had seen Stefan and his wife was when he had visited Storm's End after the War of the Ninipani Kings. It is great to see you again, Lord Arryn, replied Cassana with a smile on her face, but she was somewhat absent-minded. Good to see you too, Robert, said Cassana after she saw her son. She sighed in relief after seeing Robert and tried to console herself. It is great to see you, Lady Baratheon, said the Honorable Eddard Stark while bowing his head to greet her. Oh, you must be Eddard Stark, son of Lord Rhaegar and Lyanna. It is great to see you, said Cassana while smiling. Please, come in, Lady Cassana, you too, Edward. It had been a while, and I heard you were injured. How is your injury now? Said John. He was worried about Edward. He treated him like a son, and Edward was an amazing young man with unique talents. Edward had helped him a lot with his work. It is all good now, Lord Arryn. You do not have to worry, replied Edward with a smile on his face. He would treat everyone who treated him well with care and gratitude. He would even save them if saving them did not affect his goal. John nodded to Edward and took them to the hall to have a seat. After talking for some time and having dinner, they decided to end it for today and retreat to their rooms. After final thoughts during that night, Edward decided to apologize to his mother and did not make it more difficult for her. The woman was going to lose her husband any time now. Edward was afraid that she was going to collapse after what would happen. His efforts would be all gone by that time because of him. Why did he save her in the first place if he was going to do all this? The next day in the morning, Edward, for the first time since his meeting with Rhaegar, went to his mother's room and knocked on the door. He heard his mother's voice coming from inside the room. Come in, said Cassana. It seemed her mood got worsened last night as Edward again did not speak to her, even for one word. Cassana thought that Edward would come and apologize for treating her, his mother, like this anytime soon. But Edward did not say a word even after coming to the Eyrie. Instead, he went directly to his room. Edward opened the room and entered the room. Cassana was surprised to see him. She thought he would give her the cold treatment for a long time since he had not come to visit her the day before. Cassana decided to hold her expression and not show the surprised expression on her face and hear what Edward had to say. Edward was feeling awkward for the moment, and he was surprised by that. He thought that he would go in and say sorry to her, and that was it. But it turned that Edward cared about Cassana and could only sigh after knowing that. It seemed that he would imprison Cassana and not her leave Storm's End in the future unless she was under his men's protection. He could only do that so that she would not be a weakness with which the other could threaten him. Edward came close to his mother's bed and bowed his head as much as he could. Mother, I wanted to apologize for my childish behavior, said Edward with an awkward voice. He realized how he was childish in his behavior. That was not how the future king of the Seven Kingdoms, nor the great commander, should behave. 8. Chapter 30, Cassana's Forgiveness. Silence followed his words for 2 minutes and only broke with tears dropping sound. Cassana was crying. She felt agitated because of Edward's previous behavior. She had a bad feeling the last few days, that was why she was so uncomfortable. Edward could only look at his mother. When he saw her, she was smiling while tears covered her eyes. It was as if a sting pierced his heart. He was the reason for such a situation. If he did not behave like a child, would his mother cry like that? So the mighty stag could only apologize to his mother after nearly 2 weeks. Said Cassandra. She was blaming him for punishing her all this time when she did all that for him. Could you a mother for being afraid for her son's life? 3 Edward was feeling very uncomfortable at the moment. He could only sigh and come close to his mother to give a hug to comfort her. Did Edward really overdo it? But when he thought about the situation again, he realized he really did. But when his future was on the line, he was sure he would do it again and more if required. I knew I did something that hurt you, mother. But I got agitated when you pinched me at that time. It seemed as if you did not trust me and made me look like a child in front of those clowns. I could not take it that even you did not trust me. I hope you would forgive me, mother, said Edward, trying to divert the situation to his side. He admitted he was wrong, but the other party had to do the same. Or else, if Cassandra did something like that again, he would not be able to forgive her that time too. I knew but could not. You just had told me that. I had already thought about it, and I figured what I did wrong, said Cassandra while smiling in her tears while still blaming Edward for being too hard in dealing with his mother too. Alright. Stop crying anymore. You had to enjoy the rest of your stay in the area. We would have to go back to Storm's End in 2 days. I cannot ignore Stannis's later more than that. Father had already appointed me as Castellan of Storm's End. Stannis is already doing my job for 2 weeks, said Edward, trying to cheer the poor woman a little. He had indeed received a letter from the Stannis. It was after he had met Rhaegar when the Raven delivered a message. Stannis told him that Stefan was going to Volantis to find a bride for Rhaegar. And before he left, Stefan appointed Edward as the Castellan. He told him to return as soon as possible. In 2 days, we would go to Gulltown. From there, we would take a ship back to Storm's End. We would not be able to visit the Starks this time around. So you have to enjoy these 2 days as best as you can. So hurry up and take a bath. We have a long day in front of us, said Edward while taking his mother to wash her face. He was trying to cheer her. They did not have much time. And if she wanted to enjoy the rest of her last vacation for a while, she had to move fast. Edward enjoyed those 2 days. After spending some time with his mother, he went to his work. Edward went on his way to the F-Cups lady's place. He only had 2 days and had to spend them carefully. Edward decided to try something new with her this time, for him at least. He wanted to fuck her ass and suck her breasts while she stroked his dick. Edward stood in front of her house and knocked on the door. He was getting ready for this epic night. Edward wondered if he could convince his future wife to have a threesome with this woman. It would be a great experience. He could even take her to the castle and made her his personal whore. While Edward was still fantasizing about that picture, the door opened, and the woman stood beside the door. Seeing Edward's open mouth and his erection, she could only laugh. The woman's name was Gisela. She was from Lys, but she traveled to Westeros to work. Edward only found this information after an awkward moment with her. He had put his cock inside the woman countless times, but he still did not know anything about her too. Having a nice dream, don't you? Laughed Gisela. She had been working as Edward's exclusive whore for some time now. Edward was paying her well, and she was having a good time with him, so why she would want to tire her pussy for others? Edward snapped out of his daze when he heard her laughter. He promised to punish her a little more in bed for laughing at him. He did not wait and pushed her inside the house while closing the door behind his back. You are brave, aren't you? I hope you could last long enough this time, could you? Said Edward while teasing her breasts. He was already grabbing those huge breasts the moment he saw them. The mighty stag wants to bully a defenseless woman. Shame, shame. Ow, said Gisela, but was interrupted by Edward biting one of her nipples. He was not letting her go after saying this word. How dare she treat him like that? Was he like Cersei, for fuck's sake? Edward did not want to talk anymore and started to kiss the woman while teasing her down there. Gisela did not want to lose and started taking off his clothes while gripping his dick and stroking it as hard as she could while he was still wearing his pants. Edward was always amazed by Gisela's techniques. She was able to push his erection to its limits with just a few movements like always. Edward could only excel her in terms of stamina. He was able to do it multiple times in a row. That was only his treat in front of this beast in front of him. She was eating him up, literally. Come and sit on the bed. I want to try something different this time, said Edward as he took her hand away from his cock and pulled her towards the bed. He could not hold any more. If he let her tease him a little more, he was sure he would come the next second. Chapter 31, Battle on Bed. Edward made her sit on the bed while he leaned his head on her thighs and started sucking her nipples like a baby. That was a position he had just thought of on his way to her place. And no one would be able to make him enjoy it other than her. Gisela did not wait for Edward to tell her what to do, as she already started stroking his dick without saying anything. She was really a professional when it came to this matter. Edward thought he was in heaven after feeling the sensation from this position. He was sucking Gisela's breasts and grabbing them while she was stroking his dick. She would also kiss him after taking breaths between their kisses. That was heaven, indeed. Edward could not hold long after experiencing this position and stood up at once. He pulled Gisela's head towards his dick, and she put it in her mouth, deep inside her throat. With some tongue's movements from the woman, Edward could not hold it anymore. He instantly poured all his cum inside her throat. He did not let her skip a drop outside, but like hell, she would need his instructions. Gisela drank it all and started cleaning his dick, who stood at once ready for round 2. That was stamina, men. His dick was hard and ready for round 2. Ready for round 2? Asked Gisela, seeing his dick. She licked its tip while looking at him. You would know better, said Edward while smiling as he pulled her towards him and made her take the doggy position. Edward started teasing her from behind without putting it in. He wanted to make her ask for his dick, herself. But knowing what Edward wanted, Gisela smiled and resisted her urges. She would not bow down in a battle on the bed. She liked to tease him as he did. He might be a strong knight and brilliant commander on the battlefield, but he was still a rookie compared to her when it came to a battle on the bed. It was now a battle of patience. Who had given to his desires first? Edward was still not as experienced as her, and he would lose for sure if he did not do anything. So Edward started teasing her G-spot while inserting his thumb in her pussy. He did not forget to tease her asshole to stimulate her one, but after a few minutes, she was still able to hold on while he wanted to put it in so much. He could tell that Gisela wanted him to put in so much from her red eyes, but she was waiting for him to give up first. Edward decided to do one last thing before giving up. He started slapping her ass hard while pulling her breasts. It was his last resort. Maybe she was into this stuff, and it was. Gisela could not hold it at last. I gave up. Just put it in. Slap harder, shouted Gisela. She finally gave in. If she could hold on for 1 or 2 minutes, Edward would be the one who gave in. Edward took his battle with Gisela on the bed as a way to train his patience. He was still a young man, after all. This area was his weakness, as Edward did not have much experience in it. And if he could hold on for much longer, did not that mean that his patience was great? Edward did not wait for long and started pushing his dick deep inside her while she was shouting at him to do her harder. Edward, while enjoying her pussy, started teasing her ass by putting his finger in her hole. She shrieked and squirted all over his dick. Edward did not stop and pushed even more till he was not able to hold on anymore. He let it all out inside her pussy and did not pull out his dick 2 minutes later. Gisela could sense Edward's dick getting hard again in her pussy while Edward teased her asshole with his fingers. Edward was going for that ass. He was going to fuck her till Gisela was not able to stand up. After teasing her ass for 2 more minutes, Edward could not hold on anymore and put his dick on the hole. It was hard at first, as she said she had not been fucked in the ass for some time. But Edward was able to push his dick deep inside till his balls hid her ass. They continued like this all night. A few hours later, Edward was sleeping on Gisela's back. His dick was still in her ass. When he sensed the time, he started opening his eyes. He saw he was still riding on Gisela, and he could not help but tease her nipples. Gisela started waking up due to Edward's actions. When she saw his smiling face, she could only shake her head. Edward decided to take his leave after teasing Gisela for some time. He wanted to bring her to Storm's End, but waited to see what kind of woman was his wife before deciding something like that too. Edward spent the last day with his mother. He wanted to make her feel happy and enjoy herself to her limits. They would hear about Stefan's death in a month at most. He knew the woman might not be able to take it and start blaming herself for not going with him. Cassandra was a strong woman. But when it came to her husband and sons, she would not be able to take it if anything happened to them. Edward had finally settled his feelings about his mother and decided he would protect her and do whatever it took to make sure she would not be a target because of him. Edward had already assigned 10 of his men from the 1st unit to be always by his mother's side. He also instructed them not to allow a fly to come to his mother unless they were sure that it would not hurt Cassandra. After spending the most exciting day in her life, Cassandra retreated to her room. The next day, she was going to take a ship back to Storm's End. Her vacation was coming to an end. Chapter 32, The Reason Behind Cassandra's Actions. Cassandra had a bad feeling for the past few days. She did not know why, but she sensed danger or loss coming towards her. That was the real reason why she interfered with Edward's business with the prince. She was afraid that Edward might do something that could anger the prince. The prince then would order her son to be killed, and she would not allow such a thing to happen. Cassandra did not plan to make Edward look like a child. It was her mother's instincts that pushed her to stop her son because she was afraid that his life would be in danger. After that day passed without anything happening, she took a long sigh in relief. She decided to endure her son's anger if that meant that she was able to save him. Cassandra thought that the bad feelings she felt would be gone since her son was fine and kicking. Her son even made friends with the prince. That should be good news rather than bad ones. But would it be this simple? Cassandra did not know why, but the bad feelings hunted her again and did not leave her for once. She thought it might be something that had to do with her other sons. That was why she did not make a fuss when Edward was mad at her and instead waited till they reached the Eyrie. She wanted to check on Robert and see if the bad feelings were coming from something that might have happened to him. But when Cassandra saw that Robert was good and there was nothing wrong with him, she got relieved and confused at the same time. If it was not Robert, did that mean that something bad had happened to her sons in Storm's End or her husband? But she had just got a word from Stannis. He had sent a letter to Edward to tell him to come back to Storm's End to receive his position. He also wrote to Edward that everything was fine. That was the reason why Edward delayed going back till this moment. Was she not seeing something? That only left her with only her husband since he was on a long journey to the Free Cities. He should send a letter any time now. It had already been 2.5 weeks, and he should have arrived at Volantis by now. Cassandra tried not to think about the matter for the moment and had some fun with her son. The worries would not do her any good. She just had to relax and enjoy her vacation till she reached Storm's End. After some struggling in her sleep due to the bad hunch that hunted her at night, she was finally able to sleep. The next day, Cassandra was the one who hurried Edward. She could not wait any longer. She was afraid, but she had to be strong for the sake of her children. She did not want them to worry. That was why she did not tell Edward anything since the accident. It took Edward and Cassandra a half day before they reached Gulltown, where they could take a ship back to Storm's End. Edward inspected Gulltown before boarding the ship. He had a plan that he wanted to execute in the future, and he wanted to include Gulltown's port in it. Edward thought for some time before deciding to inform Lord Arryn about his plans in the future when he was officially the Lord of Storm's Land. Before leaving, Edward instructed his men to move back to Storm's End. It was finally time for them to rule the land, and his men had their roles in his plan. There were no more reasons for his 1,000-men unit to stay in the Eyrie. He only told them to leave 50 men to help Lord Arryn train the Knights of the Eyrie. The 50 men would have to follow them 1 month later after Lord Arryn made his preparations. 1.5 weeks later, the ship finally docked in the seaward of Storm's End. During their journey, they stopped by Tarth, where they met Lord Selwyn Tarth in Evenfall Hall. Edward wanted to see the place where the famous Brienne of Tarth was born. Edward wanted to correct the thoughts of the lords that would serve under him in the future. Someone as brilliant with a sword as Lady Brienne would fall into such a sorry state in her early years because of her preferences. That was not what Edward wanted. On the contrary, he wanted to support and see more female warriors. Edward always loved this side of Lyanna Stark and House Mormont. He wanted to see such warriors in his army. If the enemy attacked, he would not care if it was a man or a woman. On the contrary, the women were exposed during wars to more danger, as the enemy soldiers would rape women and kill the men. When Edward and his mother finally reached Storm's End and their ship docked in the seaward, Edward could sense that there might be something wrong with Cassandra. It was as if Cassandra was worried about something, but when he asked her, all he got was a smile or a "don't worry" sentence. Edward decided to stop asking her at the moment and ask her later. He did not want to annoy her at the moment as she looked worried and exhausted. Cassandra was in a hurry and did not wait for Edward and his men to sort their luggage. Instead, she went on her way hurriedly in the direction of the castle. Edward decided to ask again when he finished collecting their luggage with his men. Has she sensed something? Is she worried about Stefan? That was impossible. How would she sense something like that? Perhaps she was still upset about our fight. thought Edward to himself before shaking his head. He believed that even with Cassana's strong instincts, it would still be impossible to sense something like that when Edward did not follow her but instead stayed with his men to collect their luggage. He wanted to take it slow and let Stannis do his work a little more. He wanted to enjoy the last hours before starting the serious work towards his goal. 1 while later, Cassana could be by everyone in the castle in a hurry to the Round Hall, the main hall in Storm's End. She had heard from the servants that Stannis and Renly were there meeting with some lords. She wanted to check on her sons first. The bad feeling that she felt 4 weeks ago did not leave her alone. That was why she was in a hurry to check on them when she came back. That was the first thing that came to her mind. Chapter 33, Making Fun of Stannis. A few minutes later, Cassana entered the hall. She could see her son, Stannis, discussing something with her brother and Lord Morgan. Her son, Renly, was listening by the side. She heaved a sigh of relief when she saw that both of them were fine. The men in the room noticed her and at once stood to greet her. She was Lady Baratheon, the Lady of Storm's End, after all. Stannis nodded to his mother after seeing her. You could see he was happy to see his mother, but he was not good with the words, so he just nodded. It is great to see that you arrived safely, mother, said Renly with his honey tone. He was always good with his words, not like Stannis, who had a dour expression. That was Renly's talent. Everyone had to admit this, even if they hated his character. Renly was a genius when it came to administration and words. It was made clear in the show when all the lords of Storm's Land stood by his side. Instead of choosing his brother, Stannis. Storm's Land also thrived when he was the lord too. It is great to see you again, Cassana, said Heldon as he greeted his sister. He was the closest one to his sister. That could be shown by him choosing to Storm's End to be by her side. Although there were multiple factors in that decision, he was the one from his brothers that volunteered. It is an honor to see you again, Lady Cassana, said Lord Morgan. He was the last to speak as he was the guest here and had to wait for the host to finish before he could say anything. It is great to see all of you again. You too, Lord Morgan, said Cassana as she signaled them to finish their conversation. Everyone nodded to her, but when Cassana wanted to leave, Stannis' voice stopped her. Edward came back with you, mother, didn't he? Asked Stannis. He was getting annoyed these past few days. He was doing Edward's work for him. Edward was the one who was going to be the lord, not him. So why he had to do Edward's job for him when he was not going to be the lord? Although Edward and Stannis' relationship was the best among the siblings, Stannis had his ambitions. Stannis and Renly wanted to be the lords of Storm's Land, only Robert among the siblings who did not. Edward had to admit that was also a thing that was cool about Robert. But his jealousy of Edward for not being able to defeat him was not cool at all. Although look who is talking here, Edward was criticizing Robert for his jealousy while he was also jealous of Rhaegar. Yes, he should be here in a while, replied Cassana with a calm voice and a smile on her face. She felt comfortable at the moment after seeing that her sons were okay. She only had to check on her husband to see if he was okay, and she could completely feel relieved. Stannis nodded towards his mother, then shifted his gaze back to Lord Morgan and signaled him to continue what he was saying. Cassana, seeing that her sons were busy, decided to change her clothes in her room and wait till Edward came back and her sons to finish. Cassana went to her room silently. When she saw her bed, she could not help but lean on it. She was tired and worried for the past few days and could not help but fall asleep the moment when she touched the bed. As for Edward, after gathering his and his mother's luggage with his men's help from the ship, he took his sweet time to reach the castle. He did not want to work at the moment. He could not change anything much when he was a castellan in the first place. He had to wait for Stefan's death, and he was lord officially to start his plan. He wanted to torture Stannis for a while longer. When Edward arrived at the castle's gate, he found Stannis standing there with his uncle, Heldon, who stood beside Stannis, smiling. Took you long enough. A woman could walk faster than you, said Stannis with a cold tone. He was annoyed at Edward, who had disregarded the letter he sent. Edward was supposed to return 2 weeks earlier, but he took his time visiting the area then returned when he had enough fun. And at the moment, Edward was having his sweet time walking at the speed of a turtle. So, why would Stannis not get annoyed when their mother, Cassana, who was a lady, arrived much earlier than Edward? Edward was enjoying himself while making use of Stannis. Edward looked at Stannis with a mocking smile. He loved to see this brother of his, who always had a gloomy expression, get more annoyed. Wasn't that funny? Seeing such a dour person, who looked that he was annoyed, in the first place, got annoyed for real. "Oh, my dear younger brother, why would you hate for your brother to enjoy his vacation?" said Edward with a mocking smile. He wanted to anger Stannis more. "Shut it. Father sent a word with the raven an hour ago. Everyone is waiting for you in the hall. So move your ass and do not let mother wait for you," said Stannis with an annoyed look as black lines covered his face. The more he talked with Edward, the angrier he would become. When Edward heard that, he could not stop himself from laughing. He remembered the content of this later. He continued looking at Stefan, whose face was red from anger. Edward could not stop laughing and could only continue walking beside Stannis towards the hall 6. Before Edward entered the room, everyone could hear him laughing from miles away. He was laughing while walking beside Stannis and Helden when he entered the hall. Everyone was surprised by the scene. They were not used to seeing Edward laughing this hard. Plus, Stannis's face was red from the anger. Chapter 34, Stefan's Final Letters. "What is wrong, Edward? Why are you laughing so hard? Did you do something wrong to Stannis?" said Cassandra, who cared a lot about her children and did not want to see them fight. Edward always wondered what she would do if she knew that her sons would kill each other in the future. "Nothing, mother. Stannis is just behaving pitifully," said Edward while laughing harder. He could not stop himself from thinking about the content of the letter. And the moment Stefan's words appeared in his mind, Edward would laugh uncontrollably. Everyone in the hall looked at him weirdly. It was the first time Edward behaved like that. Cassandra could not help looking at Stannis to check if Edward did anything to him. Stannis could only shake his head. What was he going to tell Cassandra? That Edward bullied him. He would be the laughingstock in front of everyone, especially his brothers. And if a word of it leaked outside, he would not have the face to see anyone. "Fine, let's read your father's message," said Cassandra. She had just woken up after an hour's rest. She was about to ask Stannis if there were any news from Stefan when he told her that they just received his message. Cassandra was surprised but got relieved at the same time. Was not that what she wanted? She wanted to hear that her husband was doing well, and his letter was the best proof. Of course, she had to read his words to make sure that everything was doing okay. That was why she did not mind her son's behavior much and was in a hurry to read the letter. They had to wait for Edward as he was the castellan of Storm's End. Stefan also addressed the letter to Edward. "All right. Hand it to me," said Edward as he finally managed to stop his laughter or was preparing himself for another round after reading the letter. Cassandra nodded and handed the letter to Edward, who broke the seal and started reading the letter. It did not take long before Edward started to laugh again, and this time, it was much harder. "What is wrong, Edward? Stop laughing and answer me," ordered Cassandra when she saw that Edward did not intend to let them hear what was inside later. "Father say, I'd haha." Edward was not able to complete the sentence before starting to laugh again. He could only hand the letter to his mother to read, as he was not able to complete the letter without laughing. When Cassandra read the letter, she could not help herself when a giggle escaped his mouth. Now, everyone was wondering what was inside the letter. If Edward laughed alone, it might be because of the situation earlier with Stannis. But now, their lady started laughing as well. Stannis could see that something was wrong after seeing his uncle, Helden, laughing while looking in his direction after reading the letter. Moments later, Renly did the same. That was it. Stannis took it from Renly and started reading. After reading it, his face was red after hearing another comment from Edward. Stannis's personality was still dour and always had a gloomy expression like the show. But there were some small changes in his character due to Edward's interaction with him. Like he could be angered easily by Edward, a little shift in his dour expression from time to time. Although father did not find a bride for Rhaegar, at least he had found something. "I hope it is to your liking, Stannis. I hope that the fool that father found would be funny enough to make you laugh," said Edward while still laughing as he started to mock Stannis more. Everyone started laughing after hearing Edward's comment. Stannis could not hold it anymore and decided to excuse himself, or he was going to kill his brother himself. But when he was leaving the hall, a small shift in expression appeared on Stannis's face. He had a small smile too. After talking with everyone for a while, it was finally time for everyone to leave. Edward spent the rest of the day training with his men while Cassandra started doing her work with a light heart. She was finally relieved after hearing about her husband's situation. Now, he was coming back, and there was nothing more to worry her. A month passed fast. Edward spent it reviewing the financial situation of Storm's Land, studying the geography of the land to determine the best locations to start his projects, and allocating some lands to build forts. He was preparing for something huge. He was only waiting to hear about Stefan's death any time now. Edward had received a letter the day before from Stefan. Stefan told him that they reached Tarth and would return to Storm's End the next day. There was a large storm outside, and Edward was praying for Stefan while looking towards the rain. The man was his father, after all. Although he was cruel in everything, the man still took care of him all this time. So he had to, at least, pay his respect to the man before he died. Cassandra was standing beside Edward. She was worried like hell. The bad feeling did not leave her but instead did not let her sleep the night before. She had a bad feeling about the storm. She had horrible thoughts since she saw the storm. She thought that her husband might die under such intensive weather. Edward could only sigh after seeing her trembling like that. He could only hug her shoulder to comfort her. His feeling for Stefan was not much compared to Cassandra. That was why he decided to save Cassandra and not Stefan. Edward sacrificed Stefan for his own goal. If he thought of saving Stefan, that would be only for Cassandra, but that was impossible. In fact, Edward was ready to kill Stefan himself for his goal too. Don't worry. Father is going to be okay. They would return soon. Lead Edward without giving a shit about it. What was he going to say in such a situation? Edward knew Stefan was going to die, either way. So better for the sea to kill him rather than he did. Cassandra could only nod her head. She was trembling, and Edward had to take her to her room to rest. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 35, Lord at Last. When he arrived downstairs after getting his mother to her room, he found Stannis and Helden waiting for him. Well, all those with minds in their head would figure that with such a storm, no ship was going to make it. What do you think? Asked Stannis with a gloomy expression. He hoped that Edward would give a different answer. Edward could only shake his head after hearing Stannis's question. Not only because of the storm, Edward already knew that Stefan died in such a situation in the show. Stannis's face turned more black. He wished that his worries were for nothing but with Edward's confirmation, but now, he lost all hopes. The three of them stood there silently, waiting for Stefan's news. It did not take long as a soldier came running and said that Windproud was within sight of Storm's End. The ship was an hour away from the seaward. Stannis and Helden's expression changed a little. They sighed in relief. They thought that there was nothing to worry about anymore. Windproud was within sight of Storm's End, and Stefan should arrive safely. The bad times had come to an end. Edward could only shake his head and told the other two to follow him without waking anyone up. He would not let them, possibly, go to inform Cassandra. They might think that they were trying to comfort Cassandra, but in fact, they were making her witness her husband's death after giving her some hope. Edward and the other two would go to the Storm's End seaward and wait for Windproud to dock there, first. The other two could only listen to him as they followed him to the seaward. It took them some minutes to be there as they moved as fast as their horses could, and they could see Windproud fighting the strong waves to reach the seaward. They waited for about half an hour, and when Windproud came closer, a huge wave lifted it from the back and turned it upside down in an instant. Everything happened in a moment, and no one had the time to react. Even Edward could not possibly do anything even if he wished to. Everyone panicked at once. Even Stannis and Helden shouted for those on board as loud as they could. Edward could only shake his head, but he had to play his role. He at once instructed the sailors to take small ships to check on the crash. He had seen that the storm was calming down and that the last wave was its final blow. The sailors at once did what their lord ordered. And in a matter of minutes, at least 10 small ships were sailing to the crash. Although the storm was calming down, it was still hard to sail in the sea. So it took the sailors at least half an hour to reach the sunken ship. They started the search to find if anyone was still alive. Due to Edward's fast reaction and him preparing the small ships beforehand, the sailors could save more men, but Stefan and Helda died, after all. At the very least, it was different from the show when Stefan and Cassandra drowned with all the 100 men they took with them, and only the fool survived. It was a total mess in the seaward. Everyone was crying, and even Stannis could not help his tears. Edward stood there silently but had to play his role well. So he found his sorrowful face and made a tear escape his eye to at least look convincing one. Now came the hard time. Edward had to tell the news to Cassandra. He hoped that she would not lose it after hearing the news. After spending half an hour in the seaward ordering everyone what they had to do, he moved in the direction of the castle. When Edward arrived at Cassandra's room and told Cassandra the news, she had fainted at once. She was not able to accept the bad news. Her heart was telling her that something was wrong, and Cassandra did not want to believe it. And now, all the horrible thoughts that she had suppressed attacked her mind at the same time. When Cassandra woke up, she was trembling after remembering what she had heard. She entered a sorrow zone after burying Stefan. The four siblings tried to comfort her, even Robert, who had just returned with Ned and Lord Arryn. It was a long day, and after finishing everything, Edward retreated to his mother's room to try and cheer her up, but he could not. Cassandra was able to get out of this sorrowful state after a month. Edward did not know if this was his influence or not, but Cassandra seemed more determined after leaving her room. The following week, Edward finally replaced Stefan and became the Lord of Storm's End and Lord Paramount of Stormsland. Edward was the Lord of Stormsland at last. His first move in the game was about to start. He had put the first stone in his plans years ago when he moved the hill tribe to Tribe's Cave and trained his men. Now he just had to complete what he had started. He also needed to check on the Stormsland's lord's loyalty towards him. He did not want to have any variables in his land about which he did not know. He would also start the projects that he had saved all that time till this moment. The following month after Edward replaced Stefan as the Lord of Storm's End, Edward gathered everyone in the round hall. He waited that long for this meeting to make sure that Cassandra would be okay. And Edward was surprised to see that she was finally able to overcome her sorrows and resumed her duties. After he saw that Cassandra had passed the worst part, he immediately ordered for this meeting after letting her recuperate for a week. During that month, Edward did not spend it without doing anything. On the contrary, after checking the whole financial situation of Stormsland and Storm's End, in particular, Edward found that he would have enough gold coins to start his plans. The Baratheons were the third wealthiest house in Westeros, after all. Chapter 36, 4 Major Projects. Edward at once started executing his business plans. The dormant projects in his mind could finally see the light. He decided to start with 4 of those projects simultaneously. They were the core project that would help him in the long run. First of all, he had to secure a large source of money to provide gold coins for the other projects that Edward wanted to implement. And although the Baratheons had many assets and small projects, which made them the third on the wealthiest house's rank, it was still not enough to satisfy Edward, who wanted to make Stormsland the Kingdom of Gold, instead of the Lannisters. Plus, his final project was to establish a bank, so how would he do this if the Stormsland was not the land of gold, literally? So he decided to start with the projects that would make him a lot of gold. He had decided to start with the different alcohol and wine projects. He would not build a paper or glass processing factories till he had finished the first project. He wanted to wait till he was sure that these technologies would not fall into the Lannisters' hands or the other houses. He started recruiting workers with large volumes. He had announced the payment, which was high compared to the others, to the workers. And that was why there were a lot of them. After eliminating the different spies, Edward ordered them to build a factory in an empty land near the castle. And he would supervise the project himself. The factory would take 6 months to start production, but he could build the other factories after finishing this one, which would take nearly 3 months too. Edward did not forget to divide the manuals between different groups of workers. And that was because even if a part fell in the hand of spies, the other party would still not be able to finish it. The workers and even his family did not know what those diagrams were or what Edward was doing. But since he was the Lord and Edward told them it was a way to earn gold, they chose to believe him. Of course, his family was going to ask him later. After preparing for the money part, now it was the time for the navy. Since Stormsland had 2 of the widest forests in Westeros, it was perfect to say that Stormsland was the ideal place to have a strong navy. He always wondered how the Baratheons could let the Lannisters have the title of the strongest navy. Although there were many factors, the Baratheons still should have used their gold mainly on their fleets. They were one of the closest kingdoms to Essos, so how could they not concentrate on the trade? 6. Edward at once took out the blueprints of different ships from the Spanish Armada and the English Armada. He drew all the blueprints that he knew. Edward ordered to expand the seaward of Storm's End and start building the ships. He gave this project under the care of his right hand, Clyn. He did not forget to instruct Clint about how he should deal with his spies. Not to mention dividing the blueprint between the different groups of workers. 9. Edward then turned his eyes toward the Shadow Legion. It was in his mind all the time. He had to build secret forces that would help him in spying and assassination. And he had the right man to the mission. His name was Robb Stone. 1. Edward had discovered Robb's talent when the man chose to train with short swords and bows rather than the spear as his second weapon. Edward was delighted to find such a talent and at once called for him. Robb was expecting to be reprimanded by Edward for training with short swords and not training with spears like the rest. But instead, Edward started praising the man and tried to groom his talent. Now, it was the right time to use such a talent. Edward ordered Robb at once to build this organization based on Edward's instructions. Edward also told Robb to gather those that did not have anything and were willing to do such a job. He also provided their training manuals and the different way to make poisons. In the end, he let Robb go and told him that he would see the organization's progress every 3 months. Now, it came to the military. Edward ordered to increase the number of men under House Baratheon's banner from 35,000 men to 50,000. Edward also ordered to forge new equipment with a new way to process the iron and materials that he had taught to the forgers. 9. Edward knew that an increase of 15,000 would be ideal for the time being. Any more than that, and it would be a heavy blow to the Baratheons' finances. That was why he was not going to increase the soldiers more than that for the time being. He would prefer elite forces to forces with more numbers but weak. Look at the reach. For example, the Tyrells were able to recruit 100,000 soldiers, but a 10,000 Lannister was all it took to defeat them. 1. Edward appointed his men as trainers to the new army and told them that he needed them to be ready in 2 years. He knew he expected a lot from his men, but he wanted this project turned as quickly as possible. He had prepared other plans for the commanders under him, so he could not wait for long. Edward also wanted to build new castles and forts. He wanted to house his commanders and let them control the lands around these castles. Edward had already chosen the location of those forts. He wanted to spread the net and make these forts the spearhead to launch attacks on the Reach and Dorne during the rebellion, not to mention the 3 houses that would act against him. He estimated this plan would take at least 3 years to finish. It would have a whole tournament by then. 1. Edward was now looking at everyone present. He could see his mother, Stannis, Renly, his uncle, the commanders under him, the master, and his father's men. Edward called them all here to make some appointments and talk about the future of Stormsland. "Thanks, everyone. Now, let's start our meeting," said Edward while looking at everyone. Chapter 37, Long Conversation Part 1. Everyone nodded their head. They had heard about the weird orders that their lord had made and the way he spent the gold. They had heard that Edward had spent 1/10 of the Baratheons' gold in the last month. Edward had told them that they would make a lot more in the future, and all they had to do was wait and see the results. So the only choice they had was to obey him. Edward had shown them his abilities long ago, and they chose to believe in him, heartily. Mother would still do her duty as the Lady of Storm's End, said Edward while looking at his mother. He gave a look that said that he would not accept a no for an answer. Edward did not want her to return to her sorrowful state. That was why he disagreed when she had asked him to relieve her from her duties as the Lady of Storm's End. Cassandra could only nod. She wanted to rest after all that happened. She was still mourning her husband, but she came out because she did not want to look weak in front of her sons. That was why she had been giving Edward a hand for the past week. She acted like that for her son's future. Cassandra wanted to be relieved from this duty as Edward would marry sooner or later, and his bride would be the new Lady of Storm's End anyway. She did not want to remain in this position, which would always remind her of her husband, but Edward refused her request, saying that he still needed her help. "I would appoint Stannis as the Castellan. Does anyone have any objection?" said Edward with a firm voice. Edward might not use Stannis in the near future, but he still had to make use of his talent. Edward looked at everyone to see if anyone had anything to say about his decision, but he could see that everyone in the room was at ease after hearing his decision. Stannis had shown talent in the few days that he was the Castellan of Storm's End. Although Stannis was a firm general and did not have a good aptitude for management, he still did all he could to perform well. Stannis was brilliant when defense strategies and wars were related, so Edward appointing him as a Castellan was a perfect use of his talent. Edward then appointed his uncle, Heldon, as the captain of the knights. He wanted to leave the position of master-at-arms to one of his men. They knew what Edward wanted to see in his army, so they would do whatever it take to achieve that. After taking some time to finish with the appointments, his brother, Stannis and his mother stayed after Edward sent everyone away. His 8 commanders did not leave and stayed by Edward's side. "What do you plan to do, Edward?" asked his mother, as Edward did not tell anyone about his plans. He only instructed his men and the worker to do their specified tasks. "Come and sit, mother. You too, Stannis," said Edward as he took his mother and Stannis to a small hall. He wanted to explain what he intended to do so that they could explain to everyone. His men also knew a little about his overall plan, so he wanted them to hear it too. After Cassandra and Stannis took their seat, they both looked at Edward, waiting for his explanation. Edward did not let them wait for long and started explaining his plans to develop Stormsland. "Look, mother. I was already planning to implement all this when father was still alive. I have a plan to develop Stormsland and have been developing this plan since I was 10. It is still not complete. That is why I did not tell father about it. But since I became a lord, I decided to start it anyway, as it would need years to complete. I will finish the missing parts in the meantime," said Edward, faking everything, as if he was going to tell his father about those plans. He only took those plans out since he was the Lord of Stormsland. Edward had practiced a lot to be such a good liar. He did not even blink while he was faking all that. He said them naturally as if that was what he had intended to do. Cassandra and Stannis were shocked by what Edward said. He had been developing this plan all that time. What was in this plan for it to take Edward, who was known for his intelligence, all this time? They were about to ask Edward. But Edward did not wait for them to ask and started to explain. "I developed a plan that would include everything necessary to Stormsland. First, we, as the lords of Stormsland, would need a lot of gold. We would need many projects that would generate a lot of gold. I already started implementing one of them. It was a way to make different kinds of drinks that would sell at high prices. I have been experimenting on those drinks for a long time, and they are finally going to see the light. Do not worry. They are going to generate a lot of gold. I have different projects, and I will build them after this one. Please, don't ask me anything concerning the recipes, as it is confidential, as only a few knew it," said Edward as he tried to explain by showing them samples of the drinks. After Stannis had it after Edward's insistence, they were both sure this was going to work. The man was still on his principles of not drinking. Maybe that was one of Robert's influence on him, as Stannis would always see Robert with a drink in his hand when he came back to Stormsland too. The second thing, Stormsland would need a large army to defend it, as I predicted that there were going to be a lot of unrest in a few years. You already knew the state of the king and how he punished everyone. When he does the same to a great lord or a lord with an important land, chaos will fill the kingdoms. I am already preparing for such a situation. I had been training my men and instructed them to do the same for the rest of the army. Now, we only need to check if the other lords of Stormsland are on our side," said Edward, explaining everything to his mother and his brother without telling anything directly. He had to have a good reason for expanding the army and spending all that money on the equipment. 1. Chapter 38, Edward's Dirty Move. Again, Cassandra and Stannis were shocked, and Cassandra could not sit still anymore. She stood up and walked back and forth in the hall. She started to worry after hearing what Edward said. Were her sons going to be okay? She had to do something to make sure that future wars would not make things difficult for her sons. She also had to make sure that her sons would not participate in those wars. "How did you come up with this conclusion?" asked Stannis. He wanted to know the reasons behind Edward's deductions. He was a man of a great mind and thought that he should have reached this conclusion too. So, why had Edward said that while he had never thought of this? Let me give you an example. If the king killed Robert, aren't we going to rebel against the king? Although I am not a fan of Robert, he is our brother, after all. So I am going to avenge him, the same for you. Of course, it will be a different story if he wanted to rebel and required my help," said Edward while hinting at something. As if he was going to avenge Robert. If Edward did that, he would be doing it for a different reason to his profit. Edward was also hinting at what would happen in the future when Robert would want to avenge Lyanna and would require Stormsland's help when Stannis and Cassandra's expression turned grave. That was the likely situation. And if a great lord rebelled, chaos would cover all Westeros. They did not know what to say anymore. Edward had prepared a lot and developed a plan to protect Stormsland. "Is that why you refused the prince's offer?" asked Cassandra in astonishment. She did not know that her son had thought a lot about the future situations. She thought he was doing it on a whim, But it turned out that Edward saw everything that was happening behind the scenes. Yet, part of the reason, said Edward while concealing his real motive. Would not it be better to accept the offer and then change the situation to our favor? Asked Cassandra. She wanted to know why Edward refused the offer while knowing all of this. Call it a hunch or anything, but I think the Targaryens' rule is coming to an end. Many houses already had enough with the Targaryens, and they will stand against them if anything happened. I also think the same. The power had to change so that more advanced civilization could rise, said Edward with a calm voice, but his words were grave enough to shock both Cassandra and Stannis. What Edward was saying was that he was preparing a rebellion. Although that was not what Edward exactly said, Edward was preparing for his brother, Robert's rebellion. Edward did not want to be named the usurper when he became the king. He would save the image of the honorable knight that he had. Now Edward was going to meddle in the coming storm. That was shocking to both Cassandra and Stannis. Cassandra was about to cry after she heard what he said. The situation is going to be more dangerous for her sons. She had just thought of preventing her sons from participating in future wars. And here, Edward was admitting that he was not only participating, instead, but he would also be leading them himself. No, you can't. I forbid you, said Cassandra with a trembling voice. As for Stannis, he looked at his brother to see what his real intentions were. Was he going to intervene in such muddy water? Stannis was also excited. If the war took place, he would be able to show his talent. Although Stannis did not show it, he really admired Edward and looked up to him. So he knew that Edward was not going to enter a war unless he would be the victor. So he was calm while trying to analyze the situation. How are you going to intervene? Asked Stannis with a calm voice. He wanted to know how Edward would intervene in that battle. Was he going for a direct war with the Targaryen? That was not Edward's style unless it was a fallout war. Now, we are only going to observe while building Stormsland. We would feign the flame in the dark unless the war shifted in our direction, said Edward while rubbing his chin. He wanted to make things difficult for everyone by controlling the market. He would feign the flame between Rhaegar and Aerys too. Edward had already fanned the flame between Tywin and Aerys. He instructed Robb to spread a rumor in King's Landing, saying that Tywin killed Stefan as Aerys wanted to appoint Stefan as the hand of the king. Tywin knew that Edward had something to do with those rumors. He was angry but could not do anything at the moment. Aerys was at his neck and kept humiliating him. He wanted to do something about Edward, but before he did, Edward played his move first. Edward played a dirty move by sending a letter to Aerys saying that he would answer any summoning to King's Landing as he was afraid for his life. He also said that he did not want to be like his father and be killed by a friend. He would never come close to the man who killed his father too. That letter had caused a sensation in the palace as it made Aerys sure that Tywin was the one that killed Stefan. And now, his heir, Edward, was also afraid for his life. What about Aerys himself? Wasn't he going to be killed by Tywin sooner or later? Aerys could only write to Edward that he understood his reasons and he should stay in Stormsland for the time being. From that moment, Aerys would never come close to Tywin without his king's goods. Anything that Tywin said would be refused by Aerys. Edward had made their relationship more complicated than it was already. Was not that a sly move from Edward? Now, he made Aerys more paranoid and famed the flame between the two. Not to mention, now he had a permit from the king himself if he did not answer a summon to King's Landing. It was a good start for him and the Shadow Legion. Tywin was so angry at Edward at the moment. Of course, with the help of his spies inside the Red Keep, he was able to know about the letter. He could not do anything to Edward for now as he had a layer of protection against any of Tywin's moves. Chapter 39, Long Conversation Part 2. After hearing Edward's answer, Stannis could only nod as Edward already thought of everything. Cassandra was more displeased with the situation. She had assumed that Stannis would help her dissuade Edward from what he wanted to do. Mother, think of it from this point of view. If Aerys did not order our father to find a bride for Rhaegar, would our father have died? We have already entered the war, and its first victim is our father, said Edward while looking at his mother. He had decided to make use of his dead father to install the hatred emotions in his mother. He did not want Cassandra to stand against their plan. If Cassandra stood against all of Edward's plans, that would make it a nuisance for him. He finally agreed not to hurt Cassandra, but he hoped she would not stand against him. After hearing Edward's word, Cassandra indeed had a shift of expression. She wanted to agree, but her love for her sons made her stop herself from saying yes. She was afraid that her sons would get implicated by her selfish wish of revenge, and she would lose them. She had already lost her husband. Was she going to sacrifice her sons for revenge? No, I would not agree to such a reckless plan, said Cassandra with a firm tone. She would not lose her sons like she did her husband. Don't worry, mother. I would take care of everything. You know your son never makes a loss, said Edward, trying to put an end to this matter for now. He would not be able to convince his mother at once. But when she knew what would happen to Robert, she would agree by then. I would also be able to make use of Robert. Plus, even if she disagreed, he was going to execute a plan, nonetheless. He was the Lord, after all. What about the seaward and the port? Asked Stannis, to divert the subject to the other plans that Edward had. He had already agreed to Edward's plans. That was a perfect chance for him to show off his abilities, and he was not going to miss it. Well, as I said earlier, I wanted to control the market and the trade to Essos. I designed these ships with my men. These ships would be sturdy and strong enough to sail even in the worst storms. They also would be a lot faster and would be able to reach Essos in 1 week. We would have the strongest navy by then. I am planning to work with Lord Arryn and Lord Stark to build a trade network in the sea to control the Narrow Sea and Shivering Sea in the north, said Edward while talking about his ambitions. He would add Dragonstone to the network that would control the Narrow Sea when Stannis became the Lord. Edward also wanted to stop the trade of Bravos by taking control of the two seas. He wished to weaken the influence of Bravos and the Iron Bank. After observing the map, Stannis could only shake his head at Edward's incredible plan. Edward always amazed him that while he looked up to him, Edward was able to come up with a plan that would let him control the trade in the eastern half of Westeros. The Lannister and their fleet could only fuck themselves when this plan came to light. The materials would enter Westeros from the eastern ports, stopping their control over the trade roads. Cassandra also could only nod her head. Edward's plan had included nearly every detail. She could see the future of Storm's Land under Edward's rule and could only sigh when she remembered her husband. Our son did not fail you. Storm's Land would be the strongest kingdom in the future under his rule, thought Cassandra to herself as if she was talking to her husband's soul. Yet, Cassandra did not understand the plan fully as Stannis did. But anyone could tell that Edward developed it carefully and considered every variable. She could see all that from Stannis's expression. What about the southern part? You know we have a lot of disputes with Dorne. It would be hard to control the trade routes if we ignored them, said Stannis as he pointed at the Sea of Dorne and the Stepstones. It was indeed Stannis' far thinking to think of this problem. It was a strategic point. We would try to spread our influence on the sea and the Stepstones with our fleet. We would use the chaos to take some lands of Dorne, especially the islands, said Edward as he did not hide his ambition to control all the eastern coast. It was an essential part of Edward's plan. Stannis could only nod his head. His brother was going to use the chaos in his favor. He would make a large profit in the upcoming war. Cassandra, on the other side, had dark lines on her face. She did not want Edward to participate in the wars. Nothing good would come from the war. But what if the war came knocking on the doors of Storm's Land? Cassandra started to think about this possibility, and her mind began to accept the matter a little. I would implement more plans in the future. We, at first, need to increase Storm's Land's population. Even if we had to poach people in King's Landing or the other kingdom, we had to do it. We would spread rumors about the welfare in Storm's Land and attract as many people as we can. We also need to pave the roads between the different regions of Storm's Land to move better, said Edward as he had plans to build concrete roads. He would establish the cement factory in 6 months and would be able to construct sturdy houses and streets. He would also need a large population for his future plans and market. After getting a nod from Stannis and Cassandra, Edward continued his explanation. He had a lot in his mind, and he could only tell them the matters with which he could use their help. My last goal is to steal the Citadel's position, at least in our land, the Vale, and the North. I plan to educate the small folks on the basics so that we could use them, said Edward, getting another shocked look from both Stannis and Cassandra. Edward was trying to take it all. He was trying to control everything and make the other kingdoms seek him too. Chapter 40, Discussion with the Lords. Stannis and Cassandra could not help but look at each other, then at Edward. Edward had such a daring plan. They wondered how much opposition Edward was going to receive. But Edward would not tell them that he would implement those plans in the specific timing of Robert's rebellion. They did not know when the chaos would happen, but he did. After discussing for some time, Edward gave them their roles. Edward told Stannis to send a letter to the different lords. He wanted to meet them one by one to test their loyalty. It was time to put an end to this matter. If he suspected any of the lords might betray him, he would make it difficult for them little by little before burning down their houses. You might wonder why Edward would not kill them at once and save himself time and resources. The answer is obvious. Edward wanted to make them an example for those who dared to even think of betraying him. Stannis nodded his head in disgust for another half-hour before retreating to their room. They had spent a long time discussing Edward's plans, and they were all tired. Of course, Edward would hide his Shadow Legion's plans from even his mother and brother. Only the next lord or heir of Storm's Land would know about its existence. It was the time for Edward to meet some of the lords of Stromsland. He was going to meet Lord Wild of the Rain House, Lord Selwyn Tarth from Evenfall Hall, Lord Penrose from Parchments, Lord Errol from Haystack Hall, and Lord Buckler from the Bronzegat 3. Edward decided to meet those lords first for multiple reasons. First, he wanted to consolidate his control over Cape Wrath. So he called Lord Wild. He should have also called Lord Armand Connington from Griffin's Roost, but Edward did not want to waste his time with House Connington. They had already entered his list of the first houses to be eliminated by him. He decided to give Griffin's Roost to John Clyn. He would be able to control the whole Cape Wrath by then. Clyn was his deputy and his right-hand man, after all. Plus, the Rain House was among the trade network that Edward wanted to build. Second, he wanted to be sure that House Tarth was definitely on his side. The island of Tarth had a strategic location, and Edward was not going to ignore it. It was also Storm's End's entrance from the sea routes, not to mention its closeness to the Free Cities. Third, House Penrose was close to Crown Lands, and Edward wanted to build a port in the area. It would be a great addition to the trade network, so he had to make sure that House Penrose was on his side. If not, Edward was going to eliminate them before the rebellion. Fourth, House Errol of Haystack Hall occupied good lands with fertile fields. He wished he could get rid of this house and appoint one of his men there, even if they were on his side. But he had plans to take part of the Reach to himself in the future and would appoint his men in that area. Fifth, House Buckler of the Bronzegat is located on the King's Road between Wendwater and Storm's End. No need to explain how much important that location was. The castle was the entrance to Storm's End, so how could Edward not make sure that House Buckler would not betray him? After the lords of the houses gathered in the round hall, Edward entered the hall with Stannis and Cassana. The lords stood up to greet their lord. They had heard a lot about their lord and his intelligence and achievements, not to mention that he was a knight at only 15. He also participated in many battles and achieved victory in them all. Many rumors already spread all around Westeros about his deeds. Of course, that was part of Edward's doing. He wanted to spread the news to improve his image and threaten his enemies to my lord, said all the lords in one voice when Edward entered. They did not want to seem disrespectful as they heard that their young lord never forgives. He was the one who promoted the Baratheon's second motto. The Baratheon never forgives. Edward signaled the lords to take their seats. He gathered them here for a reason, and he would not waste time on such formalities. He only gathered them here to check their loyalty and threaten them indirectly. Take a seat, my lords, said Edward, trying to sound respectful. He had already let go of his arrogant attitude for now, or at least at this meeting. The lords nodded, and every one of them took his seat. They were a little surprised as they heard about how Edward's words were vicious. The stories about his speech with Tywin had already spread. Well, that was also Edward's doing. He wanted to show Aerys that Tywin was trying to kill Edward because of what he did. He famed more flame in Aerys and Edward's relationship. "Why did you gather all of us here, my lord?" asked Lord Errol. After all, the man had the most land and men between all the lords, except for House Tarth. Edward did not waste time and nodded to Stannis, who signaled a guard to bring the map that Edward had ordered him to prepare before the meeting. The lords looked a little stunned for a moment after seeing the guard coming to the hall with a map. They did not know what was happening and appeared a little panicked. Did the lord decide to take some of their lands? Or why would he bring a map to the meeting? Before discussing anything, I want to know where your standings are. I know most of you were loyal to my father, but I am not him, nor I expect your heirs to be the same as you. I would only say it once if your houses followed my orders thoroughly and without any question. I swear on the name of the seven that your houses would rise with me. But if you ever thought of betraying the Baratheons and sided with any outside force, I swear to end your houses without leaving a child alive. I would also erase your house's name from the history of Westeros," said Edward, trying to use the carrot and stick tactic. He was ready to end the life of those who even thought of betraying him. His plans could not handle any error from anyone, and he would not let anyone stop him. Chapter 41, concluding the discussion. The lords were stunned for a moment. Had they done something wrong that made their lord angry at them? Stannis and Cassandra were the same. Usually, the Lord of Stormslands would talk rationally with the other lords of Stormslands, but Edward threatened them directly. Was this his way to make them submit? "We would not dare, my lord," said Lord Selwyn Tarth before bowing a little, followed by the rest. They would not dare to provoke Edward and make their houses incur his anger. Edward was not a talk with no action man. He would do what he said. They were also thinking about the meaning of the first half of his sentence. Was the Baratheon house going to help them make more gold if they were loyal to them? Edward did not let them off with just such a trivial question. Instead, he used all the ways that he came up with to test a man's loyalty. After half an hour of questioning, Edward was sure that this group of lords would be loyal to him. But still, he was not going to trust them completely this early on. Only time could discern their real motives and loyalty. And if they dared to betray him, he swore to catch them and kill every family member of their house in front of their eyes before killing them. Not only that, but he would send their heads to the other lords to let them also see what would be the result if they betrayed him. Stannis, who stood by his brother's seat, tried to judge and see how his brother would manage the lords, who swore loyalty to his father. He wanted to learn from his brother's way of controlling the lords under him. Cassandra, who listened by the side, could only nod her head after knowing that the lords were taking her son's side. She could relay this information to her husband when she met him in the future. After Edward finished his questioning session, he told the guard to put the map on the table. He was using it for two purposes. First, Edward used it as a warning. As if he was saying to the lords, "The moment you show any disloyalty, I am going to divide your lands and give them to those who are loyal to me." The second, Edward was using it to show them the part of his plans that would involve them. He had to explain it in detail so they could understand the profit that they would be making. After explaining the details of the plan to the lords, everyone could see how excited they were. Edward had told them that he would build a new port in the Rain House, the island of Tarth, and parchments. He would provide the money himself and would also lend the port some of his ships. They would get 20% of the profit without doing anything. How could they not be excited? It was free money, and no one would say no to a free meal. They would only have to protect the area and pave the roads to transport the goods. The main road from the Parchments port would only connect to the Haystack Hall, not Storm's End. It meant that House Errol would also enjoy many goods and taxes. They could be the base market for the area. The Bronzergate would be the gate to export all the goods to King's Landing. Edward also told Lord Buckler that he would supervise the fortification of the Bronzergate. If an enemy could invade King's Landing and the Bloody Gate of the Eyrie, Edward did not want them to be able to touch the Bronzergate. And with this, Edward's discussion with the first group of the lords came to an ending. Edward did not forget to tell the lords about his ideals. He wanted to see more female warriors in Stormsland. So they were forbidden to put down any female who wished to carry the sword. He said that while looking at Selwyn Tarth. It was just a reminder for the future 5. Edward also mentioned the matter of population. He had told them that he wanted Stormsland to be the most populated kingdom in the 7 kingdoms in 3 years. And they had to decrease the taxes on their land so that the small folks could live and more could come. The lords, then, excused themselves. They were thrilled by what Edward had promised them. They were sure that the land would prosper under Edward's rule. From just the part of the plan in which they would participate, they could see the foresight of their lord. They would not dare to betray him or even think of it. They were also going to warn their descendants and their grandchildren not to cross Edward's bottom line, ever. After the lords had left, Edward started discussing with Stannis, his mother, his men, and his father's men about some small projects that he wanted to start before the alcohol factory could start its operations. He wanted Stormsland to be the center of trade, politics, military, and arts. Edward was going to achieve all that, but it would take a while. He estimated that before the show's event started, he would have finished with all the projects. Edward did not forget to tell Stannis to send a letter to the next group of lords. Edward wanted to take it slowly with the lords. He had to make sure that they would never betray him nor his children in the future. He would meet the next group of lords in the following month. At the moment, Edward had a lot to do. He had to inspect Storm's End's new port and see the progress of the ships. The rest of the first batch should be ready to enter the sea by now. He had already attended the launch of the first galleon-type ship the previous week. The rest of the batch were frigates and galleons 11. After seeing the huge success and the large ship in front of their eyes, everyone started looking at Edward as if he was a messenger of the Seven. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 42, Davos Seaworth. Stannis was the one with the funniest expression. After all, the man had a love for the marine wars. But Edward refused to let him see the ship's diagrams. He trusted Stannis for now, but he knew that when his ambitions kicked in, he might take Edward's fleet with him. Stannis did the same in the show when Stannis took the royal fleet with him. Edward would not allow that and told Stannis that he had trained some of his men to take such a position, which he really did. How would a strategist not prepare some of his men for the naval warfare? Edward told Stannis that he did not have his men's experience of dealing with ships. Plus, Edward had already taught his men about different naval warfare strategies. Edward would be the admiral of the fleet. His deputy would be the actual one to lead this battle. Edward had already prepared one of his men and promoted him to deputy admiral long ago. His deputy's name was Bruce Caron, an OC character. He was the younger brother of the Lord of Nightsong. His brother sent him to be Edward's squire when Stefan announced about the matter. As the younger son and a difference of 20 years between him and his big brother, Bruce had no chance of inheriting Nightsong, not to mention that his father had died when he was still 8. His brother was already the lord, and since Bruce from the second wife, his brother did not like him. So it was better for him to follow Edward. At least, with Edward, he would have a great life too. After training under Edward's supervision, Bruce's talent came to light. Edward was surprised to find such a talent in naval warfare from such a distant place. Edward had used mock battles with small ships in the area to groom Bruce's talent after getting Lord Arryn's permission. He taught him all he knew about naval warfare, and Bruce did not disappoint him. In Storm's End's new port, Edward looked at the large building that took only a month to build. He had hired tons of workers to achieve such results. Edward was now looking at the 20 ships that had taken the workers 2 weeks to finish simultaneously. Every one of them needed at least 500 workers to work on it to achieve this result. Edward was really proud of what he was seeing and decided to reward the workers. The workers all cheered when they heard what their lord said. No one was more proud than them of what they had achieved. They brought such beautiful jewels to the light with their own hands. How could they not be proud? They swore to the Seven to follow their lord, especially the master crafters and forgers. They were able to build such marvelous ships because of him. Although they did not know the design of the whole thing as Edward divided the design. He made sure that no one would be able to complete it on his own. He even made the crafters that he trusted to build the main parts. It was now the time for the first squadron's trip. It would have its first mission to Essos under Bruce's leadership. Edward had already prepared many goods like clothes, food, jewels, and equipment. They were for the first trade with the free cities. These goods were processed by the new techniques that he instructed the master forgers and crafters. Edward wanted to establish the first trade route with Tirash, Myr, and Pentus. He was sure that he would be able to attract those greedy merchants. He would first attract them, and when his alcohol, glass, and paper production came to light, they would be the ones begging him to make deals with him. After instructing Bruce and sending Davos Seaworth with him, Edward was on his way to the location he would meet Robb Stone. Of course, all of you are wondering what the hell Sir Davos was doing here. Did you think that Edward would leave such a talented man to Stannis? The man was a smuggler, and due to his childhood, he knew how to earn money. Of course, Edward was going to use such a talent. He already wanted to start a big trade with the free cities, so he needed this talent. It was a funny story, actually. As Edward wanted to use the man's talent, what was the best way to keep the man other than catching him smuggling goods to Stormsland? So Edward sent the task of finding the man to the Shadow Legion and instructed them to spread a rumor to the man that some people wanted his goods in Stormsland. Under Robb's leadership, the Shadow Legion was able to shift the man's attention towards Stormsland. After knowing the location of his trade, Edward and his guard moved in that direction. They caught the man with the smuggled goods. You all should have seen Stannis' face and words after Edward's men brought the man with the smuggled goods. Edward had specially brought Stannis with him to see his reaction. After Stannis saw the man and the smuggled goods, Stannis kept shouting about punishing him by cutting his fingertips. Edward could not hold his laughter after knowing that Stannis wanted to cut the man's fingertips, as he did in the show. Of course, Edward would not do something like that. Although that action was one of the many reasons why Davos respected Stannis and decided to follow him, Edward decided to be more civilized. The man was a talent in the trade, smuggling, and negotiations. So Edward decided to be easy on the man. After imprisoning him for 2 weeks, Edward summoned him and told him that he needed a talent like Davos under him. After some persuasion, Edward was able to get the man to work for him. And it was a much gain for Edward, as he only had Robert's rebellion in 4 years. He would have 16 years after that without many wars, so he would have to concentrate on Storm's Land's development and the trade with the free cities and the other kingdoms. Chapter 43, 3 Missions. After Edward arrived at the road where he would meet Robb, a soldier wearing armor as one of Edward's men came close to him. Yet, that is right, that was Robb. Edward had instructed the forgers to make armors, which held Edward's own sigil, for his men. The sigil was a deer like the Baratheons with a dragon's wings on its back. That was one of the ways that Edward decided to use when the both of them met. Edward only summoned Robb this time to check how things were going in the Shadow Legion. He wanted to know the progress and how the recruiting was going. It had not been 3 months yet, but Edward valued the Shadow Legion very much. He had a lot of tasks for them. Edward summoned him today for another 3 missions. First, Edward wanted Robb to spread another rumor in King's Landing, which said that Tywin was preparing his army to attack King's Landing and kill Aerys. Tywin was gathering some of his men in the last few weeks. He was preparing to deal with a small lord that refused to pay the taxes. Edward was preparing to use this action to fan another flame. Edward knew such a petty trick would not trick those with great minds. Those would think that it was only a rumor to hurt Lord Tywin's reputation. But what about the small folk and the king who was sure that Tywin was trying to kill him? Would not that hurt their relationship more? One Edward also wanted to use the small folks to hurt Tywin's image. Edward would use the small folks, although he knew that Tywin would have prepared this time for Edward's tricks. Edward was sure that Tywin was thinking of how to pay him back for his previous ploys. But all that Edward wanted was for Aerys to hear these words. Second, Edward needed the Shadow Legion for a much more important mission. This one was for his future plans. Edward gave Robb a list of people that must be eliminated by the Shadow Legion in the next 2 years. Those people held leadership positions in the free cities, and since he wanted to control the trade in the Narrow Sea and the Shivering Sea in the north, he wanted to build a conflict in those cities. Especially those from Braavos, Edward would cripple their management of trade and the Iron Bank. He also wanted some of his men to infiltrate the free cities and try to hold leadership positions. Edward asked Robb to concentrate on Tyrosh and Lys as their leaders were the wealthiest families, so it would be easier to infiltrate. Third, this one was a long-term mission. It might take a decade to complete it, but it had much more value than the last 2. Edward wanted Robb to start sending men to the city of Ashay, the Empire of Yeti, and the Shadowlands beyond Ashay. He did not want to sacrifice them or something. Edward just wanted them to find 3 things for him. The first and the most important thing to him now was a way to block the vision of the three-eyed raven. Edward thought that if he wanted to complete his goal, he had to find a magical way to hide himself from the three-eyed raven's visions at least. If Edward left it like that, he was sure that Bran would know about his real character that Edward wanted to hide, and that would ruin everything. Finding something like that was nearly impossible in Westeros. There might be some secrets about it in the old Valyria, but it was too dangerous. His only option was the city of Ashay or Yeti, to the east of Karth and the Bone Mountains. Edward knew that this mission was difficult and there might not be any results in the near future, but he had to do it for his future. He could wait for 10 to 15 years, and he was sure that he might hear some news about it. If they could not reach Ashay, he would have to search for a way in Essos. The second thing that he wanted them to find is dragon eggs. They would have 3 different values depending on the third thing which he wanted his men to find. The first value is their obvious gold value. They could be sold by him for high prices, especially after Daenerys hatched her dragon eggs. They would be equal to mountains of gold dragons in Essos after Daenerys Targaryen's dragon fucked them up too. Edward could also use them to manipulate Daenerys by promising to give them to her for some favors. After that, he would use Daenerys for his profit, although this plan might fire back in his face. Literally one. The third thing that Edward wanted his men to find and by which the dragon eggs would have a new light and value in Edward's eyes was the magic way to hatch the dragon eggs and connect them to his blood. If his men could enter the Old Valyria, he was sure they could get him what he wanted, but Old Valyria would make them vanish. Edward promised himself to visit Old Valyria after becoming the king. He would leave the throne to his son and move on his way to the city. He would have achieved everything that he wanted by then. After Edward told Robb about the 3 missions, they split up after acting by ordering Robb to ride to King's Landing with a message. As if that would fool anyone. Was Edward making fun of us or something? Oh, man. A year passed since Edward's meeting with Robb. A lot had happened this year. We could divide what happened this year into 5 different sections. For a start, Edward's alcohol project had started its production 7 months earlier. The alcohol and wine business was a hit. At first, Edward faced many problems when he wanted to ship the alcohol and wine and enter the free cities, not to mention King's Landing and Lannisport. For nearly a month, Edward was not able to make any profit from his alcohol and wine. After some investigation, Edward knew that Tywin was able to finish a deal with some of the masters of the free cities. Chapter 44, Business Plans Result. Tywin had figured what Edward tried to sell and part of Edward's plan. Edward had to admit that Tywin was the most intelligent in all of Westeros, and if Edward was not focused for a moment, he was sure that he would fall into Tywin's trap. Edward also admitted he would lose without even a chance to fight back without the knowledge and problem-solving thinking from his previous life. Edward's administration and management plans were even from it. Edward wondered if Tyrion did not kill Tywin, would Tywin be the winner of the war? After Tywin knew that Edward started to make alcohol and wine and planned to sell them to the rest of the 7 kingdoms and the rest of the free cities, Tywin at once made a counter-plan. He also started making alcohol and signed a deal with the free cities to sell his alcohol at low prices. He also added a condition to make it hard on Edward. The masters of the free cities, who would always seek profit, thought that they would stand to gain large profits and at once agreed. When Edward shipped his first alcoholic drinks to Pentos, they didn't allow him to sell them in the cities, saying that they restricted the trade with Westeros, obviously a lie. Braavos and Muir did the same. But one thing that Tywin did not take into account when he tried to counter Edward's plans. The alcohol and wine that Edward made were on a different level compared to any alcohol in this world. So, Edward did not care and let the drinks sell themselves. He first let his men sell it in the other kingdoms, especially the Vale and the North. When the other merchants from the other kingdoms heard about it and tasted it when they were in the Vale or the North, they started buying it in large volumes. Edward's goods soon entered the other kingdoms' markets. And whatever Tywin did, he was not able to even prevent it from entering King's Landing. Edward also started trading with the far free cities like Lys, Cahir, Volantis, and Tirash. He refused to make any deals with any of the 3 cities, except Pentos. The reason was that Edward did not want to stop his profit from these cities for such a small matter. It was all business, and since Pentos apologized and offered compensation, why would not Edward ignore something like that? It was all for profit. That was what a good merchant would always think, the profit above anything else. For Muir, Edward told them that his goods would only enter their market from the next year. He could not keep up with the demands. He had to start building another alcohol factory so that the production could cover half the market's orders, at least. As for Braavos, they refused to apologize. So Edward announced that he would make a trade with them. They had done what Edward had expected from them. Although Braavos sought profit as well, they were always haughty and refused to bow down to Edward. Wanted to undermine Braavos and Iron Bank's influence, and he would start from there. When the other project started the production and Edward controlled a large segment of the market, he would announce that any city doing business with Braavos would not receive any of his goods. After his alcohol started making him many gold dragons, Edward at once established his other projects. Edward built the glass and paper processing factories, the cement factory, perfume business, and other small projects like cotton clothes and some simple makeup products all at once. The alcohol business was able to generate 1,000,000 gold dragons in a month. So why would not he be daring and build all of them? For all these projects had already started the production, and the profits they generated for Edward were huge. They were like a gold machine. Edward's profit for the previous month was 5,000,000 gold dragons. And this profit was after deducting all the expenses of the different projects, like the workers' salaries, the ships, the armors, and the material for building 2 castles. To Cassana, who helped Edward with the expenses, was shocked, not to mention the innocent Stannis, who did not participate in the business plans. Everyone in Storm's End could sense the welfare after that huge sum of the gold dragons entered the vaults. Tywin, who was keeping track of all Edward's movements, knew about the new wealth of the Stormsland. The problem was that he could not imitate any of the products. He even gathered many meisters from the Citadel and gave them only one task. He wanted them to figure how Edward made these products. After months of research, those people could only sigh in defeat. Tywin was Tywin. How could he let such a small obstacle stop him? He sent spies to try and get the recipes and manuals, and they managed to get some parts of them, which had surprised Edward. Edward was the one who implemented the system himself, so how could it fail? It turned out that Tywin could even sway some of the crafters and forgers that Edward even trusted. Fortunately, Edward had implemented a security system for all the buildings and could catch the spies. Edward did not forget to kill those who betrayed him and hang their heads in front of the buildings. He also sent the spies' heads to Tywin through the Shadow Legion too. After that accident, Edward started to really get afraid of Tywin. Edward wanted to tell him, "What's the fuck, man? Would not you leave me alone? After all that I had done and you still were able to do this? What's the fuck?" Rhaegar also heard about the news. He was paying much attention to Edward, especially after he became the Lord of Storm's End. He wanted to judge Edward's ability to develop his lands, and Edward proved his value and more. Edward would be able to make the Baratheon the wealthiest house in Westeros in 2 years at most. Chapter 45, Naval Warfare. Rhaegar was now more resolute on recruiting Edward, and he would do whatever it take to make him his hand. Rhaegar thought that he still had time to persuade Edward. He had a few more years before his father would die, and he became the king. So Rhaegar decided to make use of the next few years and persuade Edward. Edward also received a letter from Lord Arryn telling Edward that he did great and that Jon was sure that Edward could do more for Stormsland. He also stated that he was congratulating Edward for the success of the large plan that Edward implemented. Arryn also thanked him for not forgetting the Vale and the North and the wealth that the Vale could make because of Edward. Edward also received a thanks letter from Lord Stark. Lord Stark knew that part of the reason why Edward helped him was the engagement between Robert and Lyanna and his friendship with his son, Eddard. So Lord Stark decided to leave part of the gold dragons to Ned. After all, Ned was not supposed to inherit anything. Lord Stark was now more insistent on Lyanna and Robert's relationship than ever and refused any word from Lyanna. Lyanna knew about Robert's whoring at the moment. She already started to hate him and asked her father to cancel the engagement between her and Robert. Edward did not know that he became part of the reason that Lyanna suffered more. Edward was only thinking about his profit, and since he wanted to suppress Braavos, then controlling the Narrow Sea and the Shivering Sea was important. And the North and the Vale would play their roles. Many lords started offering their daughter to Edward for marriage. After seeing his huge success, how would anyone not want a part of it? Even Lord Stark wished he could marry Lyanna to Edward, but Edward did not seem interested in the girl when he visited the North. Plus she was his brother's fiancée. That was the progress of his business plans. Edward could have made the Baratheon the wealthiest house by the moment if he did not use millions of gold dragons on the other projects. But that did not hinder Edward. He knew that he could make the Baratheon the wealthiest house sooner or later. What he needed at the moment was to improve Stormsland's overall power. At the end of this year, Edward had 320 new ships. The growth of Stormsland's fleets was incredible. It made the rest of the houses shocked. Not only the number of vessels in the fleet had increased, but the quality of them was also a way better. Edward was able to construct many sea routes with the free cities, thanks to his fleet. Using his knowledge and Bruce Caron's talent, Edward could organize his fleet with trained marines and sailors. After consulting with his men and his family, Edward came up with a plan to build a school. In this school, he would train sailors and marines in naval warfare. The problem was how to filter the spies. After what had happened with Tywin's spies, Edward did not trust his security system fully anymore. If Tywin's spies were able to get parts of his recipes and blueprints, it meant that they could get their hands on the training routines as well. Edward could only think of a new security system with strict protocols to help him. That was all he could do. He could only increase the security measure around all the projects and the people working on them. It did not take long before Edward's fleet entered its first confrontation. Their first naval battle was with the pirate groups of Lucini and Merriman on the Stepstones. After Edward's goods entered all the free cities, those pirates could not sit still after knowing that many ships that carried the gold dragons were passing through their islands without them doing anything. Would they be good pirates if they did not attack those ships and take all the gold? They firstly did not allow the ships to pass without paying a tribute. At first, Edward agreed as he did not have many ships, and the amount they would pay was a lot by then. But at the end of the 8th month, after Edward became the Lord, those pirates became daring enough to try to take over his ships. They did not allow the fleet to pass through Stepstones. And if any vessel from Edward's side came close, they would start attacking. Edward would never bow to them. He was only taking some time to build and organize his fleet, or how he would allow them to extort a tribute from him. Edward already had his eyes on the Stepstones, and he was going to get rid of them sooner or later. So, after the pirate did something like that, he at once ordered Bruce to prepare the fleet. Edward was ready to go all out as he instructed Bruce and his deputies to gather and help him think of a strategy to take control of the Stepstones. After deciding the battle strategy, Edward deployed most of the fleet. The fleet only had 150 ships by then, and Edward ordered 120 ships to attack. Compared to the pirate dens who had occupied the place for centuries, 120 ships were a small number. The pirate decided to go all out and deployed around 500 ships. They thought it would be their victory since they had the numbers and would be fighting in their area 3. Unfortunately for them, Edward's ships were nothing those clowns' ships could compare. Plus, Edward had already installed ballistics and other war machines on his heavyweight ships. The sailors and the marines were also proficient archers. Edward made sure of that. He had provided them with long-range bows and crossbows. That was why he was sure he was going to win this battle. Although that was the case and that was what had really happened, the pirates had the experience. They were sailing in the sea for centuries. And although Edward's men were trained well by him, they still lacked the actual experience to fight on a naval battle. It was the first battle on the water for many of his men. Chapter 46, Controlling Stepstones. Edward's losses were more than he had expected. He had lost about 25 ships with nearly 1,000 deaths. It was a good result in many people's eyes. But for Edward, this battle was a catastrophic failure. He already had the best ships and war weapons but still lost this many. He could make more ships, but most of the crews were the experienced sailors in Stormsland. He would have to train new sailors and marines from scratch. It showed how much he had underestimated this world. Although he had these losses, the gains outweighed the losses. He had made an agreement with Tyrosh. They would control the north of the disputed land, and he would give them some of the small Stepstone islands in the northeast. He would have the rest of the Stepstones and Grey Gallows of the Broken Arm. Edward made this agreement for 3 reasons. The first was that he owed Tyrosh a favor since they helped him when the other 3 cities did not allow him to sell his goods in their lands. Tyrosh, on the other hand, welcomed him and made it easy for him to sell his goods. Although they had done that for more gold, at least they allowed him to make his first big deal. The second was the Archon of Tyrosh knew all the organization in Karth, which in return would help his men to reach Yeti and Ashe. Karth had an important position, and Edward wished to control this city. But he would never dare to do such a thing. Karth had many organizations and warlocks that could use magic. Plus, due to its location, they had a connection with Ashe and Yeti and the cities in the Shadowlands. The third was his motive to control the city in the future. He wanted to take it little by little as he planted men from his Shadow Legion by the Tyrosh's master. He wanted to see if he could come close enough to own the city in the future. Edward decided to build 2 great cities and 2 towns on those islands. He would set the first city on the island closest to Lys. He would control the trade route between Lys and Tyrosh from the sea. This city would be an open market for him to sell all his goods. It was going to be a gold dragon generator for Edward. Edward named it Mars. The second city would be on the island closest to Dorne. He wanted to take Dorne out of the way from any dispute that could happen in the future. It would also be the best place from which he could start an attack on Dorne from the sea. Edward named it Narrow Hall. The other 2 towns would be between these 2 cities to work as a stop and a rest for the traveling ships. And with this, Edward had concluded his plan of taking over the Narrow Sea and most of the trade routes between Westeros and Essos. It would take some time to build the cities and the towns. They would also need a large number of gold dragons. Edward estimated that they would need at least 4 to 5 years for the cities to finish and start making a profit for him. Edward was not in a hurry with this project, as it would still need a peaceful time to earn him more gold dragons. He just decided to start with a city on the trade route between Lys and Tyrosh. Edward did not forget to order one of Bruce's deputies to lead a force of 50 ships and guard the area. He would also send another 50 to patrol the area around Tyrosh after getting their permission. Edward saw it as a chance to getting involved with Tyrosh. He would first start it as a friendship relationship with the Archon of Tyrosh. Edward had helped them with a pirate problem after all. Tyrosh was always the city that would suffer losses from the two pirate ends. After controlling all the trade routes between the free cities, Edward would start with his plan. He would make the Archon his puppet or replace him. At the end of the year, Edward sent another 50 ships to patrol the sea between his city and Lys. It was because Lys wanted to start another dispute with Tyrosh. Edward decided to have a more active role in influencing those cities. That was why he worked as a mediator between the two and agreed to send the 50 ships as peace-guarding troops. Both Lys and Tyrosh would pay him compensation, so why would he refuse? In the last months of this year, Edward was able to increase his influence on the Narrow Sea, the Stepstones, and the Sea of Dorne. He could now meddle in the internal affair of Tyrosh and Lys, but he maintained his friendship. He would not be able to control them with his fleet. Both cities had large fleets. Edward was only using the disputes between them to meddle in their affairs. Edward was able to construct a small part of his trade network plan. He was able to connect Storm's End with Tarth after building a large port on the island. He then informed Lord Arryn and Lord Stark about his plan, to which both of them agreed. The first part of the trade network was to organize voyages between the four ports at specific times of the week. 50 old ships from Storm's Land, 30 ships from the Vale, and 20 from the north would start the first phase. The trade route would begin in Storm's End and end at the White Harbor in the north. Its four main stops were Storm's End, Tarth, Gulltown, and White Harbor. There would be some stops on the road from the other regions to resupply like the Whispers and Stonitants and Crownlands, but they would change every time. Edward would add other permanent stops to the trade route in the future when the ports were ready to handle it. He also would add more trade routes so that the three regions could flourish. Chapter 47, Shadow Legion's Progress. Shadow Legion operations reached the top. Edward was right to choose Robb Stone to build his Shadow Legion. The man was a genius at managing such an organization. He was able to grow it in Westeros and Essos. Now, it only needed time to consolidate its foundation and increase its number, and they would be able to control a large piece of the market. The scale of the Shadow Legion spread over Westeros and the free cities in Essos. Their main job in Westeros was infiltration and gathering information while spreading some rumors in the middle. At the moment, Edward had an eye in every major house. Although he was not on the scale of Varys Littlebirds or Baelish from the show, Edward was sure in a few years he would have an eye and an ear in every house in Westeros. He even had some eyes in Casterly Rock and Lannisport. Tywin would not be able to do anything about them. Varys and Baelish did not participate in the information-gathering competition yet, as Varys just started serving the Mad King this year. He still had a long way to go. As for Baelish, he was still in Riverland. Edward concentrated on infiltrating Tywin's lands because of Tywin's previous tricks. If Edward could not prevent Tywin's spies, then he would get in Tywin's main base. He would be able to get all the information he wanted about the Lannisters' movements. Since Tywin was not there and only appointed his brother as a Castellan, it was easy for Edward to do it. Edward wanted to have many eyes and ears in Casterly Rock by the time Tywin resigned his position as the Hand of the King. That was some of the Shadow Legion's operations in Westeros. As for Essos, Robb was able to change the organization's nature and build other branches in Lys, Tyrosh, and Myr. It was really amazing to do all that in just 1 year. That was why Robb's rank in Edward's eyes was on the same level as the other commanders. Robb was able to change the Shadow Legion to sell swords in Essos. Their first job was to protect Lys. The Magisters of Lys did not resist hiring them after some of their operations in Myr. The Shadow Legion was building its fame in the disputed land at the moment. They would receive jobs from the three cities of Lys, Tirith, and Myr. Edward was impressed by Robb Stone's ability. He did not resist giving the man some advice. Edward wanted Robb to consolidate his foundation in the disputed land before shifting some operations to the Slavers Bay. After that, he wanted Robb to have a hand in Qarth, at which he could find some information about Edward's task. And if their organization could reach the top in Qarth, Edward might have some hope to control the city in the future. As for the military, Edward did not increase its number. He did not want to show anyone that he was preparing for war. Edward had another plan. At the moment, he was building 2 castles, and he would appoint 2 of his commanders as the lords. And since every house had men under them, Edward would allow them to recruit 2,500 men, each. By the time of the rebellion, he would have 50,000 directly under House Baratheon. Another 10,000 under his 4 commanders when Edward finished the 2 castle, and another 2 in the next 3 years. With the other houses and the increase in population, he would have the ability to gather around 100,000 men without a fleet and marines. The location of the first castle was east of the Dornish Marches and to the northeast of Ashford. The castle's name is Summoning Hall. It would be the spearhead to attack the Reach. The location of the second castle was on the hills between Fellwood and Grandview. The castle's name is Helltown. It would work with Tribes Cave and Storm's End in the south to suppress the 3 houses of Connington, Grandison, and Fell. The 2 castles should operate by the following year. Edward would start building the next 2 castles by then. The population of Storm's Land saw some increase this year, although not to the degree that Edward hoped. He did not know if this was also a work of Tywin or another great lord, but he decided to add it as a must-do mission of the following year. Although the population was not to his hopes, he saw some improvement with the female warriors, at least. Although some people still looked down upon them, some persisted and could get a position in his or the other lord's army. Edward was now in Starfall. After long persuasion from Cassana, Edward finally set on the road to find a wife who would be the future Lady of Storm's End too. It was not only because of his mother's persuasion. Edward thought that it was finally the time to marry and have children. He found his life empty in the previous year. Although Edward had much fun with Gisela when he visited the Eyrie, he did not feel anything when he was with her. Edward only thought of satisfying his manly instincts and desires. That was why he felt lonely when he was doing his work as the Lord of Stormsland. Edward knew that he was missing something. And after some thoughts and his mother's persuasion, he figured that he had no love in his life. Except for his mother's love, Edward did not think of any female unless he wanted to have sex. Edward only saw his goal in front of him. Anything else was just a nuisance, but after ruling Storm's Land for the whole year, he had finally figured another reason to live. After finally figuring the problem, Edward thought of whom he could approach, and who among all the females would suit him better, and he would still stand to gain. Yet, Edward looked at it from the emotional and prophet's views. No one would change his personality in minutes. He had already worked hard to think of marriage. This change was already acceptable. 1. Chapter 48, Who is gonna be the lady? Edward made a list in his mind about all those who would suit him. He then started to eliminate those who he would never even think. The process was as follows. 1. Lyanna Stark. Edward did not like her in that way. He only thought of her as a friend or the sister of a friend. Plus, marrying her would fuck everything regarding the Night King. After long thoughts, Edward was sure that he could not defeat the Night King himself. Plus, why would he even try to fight the thing when others would do that for him? So, he decided to eliminate Lyanna from the list. Lyanna was a dreaming girl. Yet, Edward liked her personality a lot, but he did not feel anything when he was with her. Edward would want such a thing to come, naturally. He did not want to force himself to like Lyanna. Robert and Rhaegar could have her all they wanted, as Edward was not really interested in the girl. If he did something, that was because he did not like his brother nor Rhaegar too. Elia Martell. Edward thought that Elia would be a great wife. Yet, she was the ideal and beautiful wife in his imagination. Plus, if he had her, he would stand to control Dorne in the future. He could have Dorne either by controlling it directly or killing the rest of the Martells and appointing one of his sons as the prince. All the South might even fall under his rule. There were only 2 problems that pushed Edward to eliminate Elia from the list. The first was her weak body. She would not be able to bear him more than 2 children. To achieve his future plans, he needed more children. The second was her death, and the series would help him to accomplish some of his goals. He would use her death as a reason to do some actions. Yet, it sounded cruel, but he did not care. He had never seen the woman, nor Edward, who had any relationship with her. Plus, he was not the one who was going to kill her. He was only using her death, though he did not mind described as cruel in the first place. 3. Daisy Mormont, the daughter of Midge Mormont and the cousin of Jorah Mormont. Edward always had a fetish towards the female warriors. That was clear, as he always liked the she-wolf and the she-bear from the north. That was why Edward was insistent on improving the lives of the female warriors in his territory. But after some deep thought, he found that he would not gain anything from the Bear Island. And since he was not going for the she-wolf, he would not go for the she-bear. Yet, call him superficial or anything, Edward would not even care. This the world where power is everything for Catelyn and Lysatelli. He just thought of them for a moment before eliminating them from the list. Edward always despised House Tully, except Sir Brian and the Blackfish. House Tully would be the last on Edward's, and he still would not marry from them too. Edward hated three houses the most, but the reason for this hatred was different. The first house on this list was House Greyjoy. Edward found those from the Iron Islands as scumbags and ruffians that he wished to kill every one of them. The second was House Tully. Such an inept house that Edward wished to drive to its extinction. If not for their rich lands, Edward was sure that many would have killed them already. The third was House Lannister. His hate for Lannister was for pure revenge and rivalry. He did not despise them. On the contrary, he thought of them as the most deserving house of the throne. Unfortunately for them, Edward was born here 5, Cersei Lannister. Just a thought of Tywin's face before eliminating her. He also did not want someone from the Lannisters. He saw them as his rivals, and after Tywin's multiple tries, there were no chances of reconciliation. 6. Visera Rhiannon, an OC character. Visera from Bravos, her father is one of the key holder of the Iron Bank. If he had married her, he might have a good relationship with Bravos. But that was going to fail sooner or later, as he was preparing to start his own bank. 3-7, Illyria Dane, the sister of Arthur and Ashera Dane. She was one of the candidates, but after Edward had inquired about her age, he found she was only 12. He wanted to marry at once as he could not wait to have his child this early on. 2-8, Ashera Dane. Edward did not want to marry this reckless woman at first. He knew all about the famous Ashera Dane, one of the most beautiful women in Westeros. But the woman was flirtatious and so daring. She would attract flies everywhere. Eddard Stark, Ser Barristan, and even Jon Connington all fell for her, not to mention Brandon Stark and their anonymous relationship. God only knew what these two had. But after some persuasion from his mother, Edward decided to visit Starfall at first and never judge without meeting the woman. 6. That was why Edward was in Starfall. The woman had committed suicide before the show's events. Plus, he did not see the woman since he was born in this world, and all he knew about her was the description from the books. Actually, Edward had some curiosity to see the woman. Everyone talked about how beautiful she was in his previous life. Edward was staying in an inn in Starfall. Edward had sent a letter to House Dane that he would only arrive after a week. Edward came a week earlier to see the magical castle and judge her himself. He knew it was not a way to treat his future wife, but he did not trust the woman. Plus, he was not sure if she would be the wife. Actually, Edward prepared to reject her, for Edward only brought 10 of his men with him. He did not want to attract much attention. He acted as a merchant with his men as his helpers. Edward had only sent a letter to House Dane saying that he wanted to discuss business with them. He did not tell them that he was seeking marriage or something. Edward was now walking through the streets of Starfall. He was going to the market in the city. What was the best way to know more information? Of course, from the stories of the Small folks. And the market had many Small folks too. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 49, Meeting with the Most Beautiful Dornish Woman. While Edward was walking through the market and hearing many stories, someone pushed Edward from the back while hiding himself with a cloak. Edward was annoyed as the man did not even turn back to apologize. Instead, he kept moving forward without any care. Edward was about to ignore the man when he raised his hand and started provoking Edward by giving him the middle finger. Edward's men were angry. They were about to take out their swords when Edward stopped them. Edward did not want to make a scene in the market. Instead, he decided to follow the man. He would teach the man a lesson when he left the market. After following the man for a half hour, the man finally headed to the exit of the market. Edward was going to leave it like that without some punches on the man's face. So, Edward and his men followed the man. Edward trained them to move without leaving traces. When Edward saw a corner street with no one walking through it, he decided to grab the man and kick his ass. "You cunt, stop there," said one of Edward's men after getting a signal from Edward. They were enduring all this time while following the man. Now, it was the right time to punish him. The man stopped after hearing the words but did not turn back. Edward was more annoyed now and came close to the man. "Stop behaving like a cunt. Turn the fuck up," said Edward in somewhat an angry tone. He was trying hard to suppress his arrogance. But when he met an arrogant person, He would show them what arrogance was. 10 Edward closed the distance and pulled the man while holding his cloak. The man was pulled towards Edward's direction, and because of his small stature, he could not keep the cover as it slid from him and revealed a never-seen-before scene. Edward had his life's shock at the moment. What he saw made him redefine the word beauty. The man he was following turned into a tall and fair maiden with haunting violet eyes. Her long dark hair tumbled around her shoulders. She was so beautiful that Edward's mouth opened and never closed. Edward's men were stunned as well. If their lord was shocked, how could they not? They had to be good subordinates and follow behind their lord. 8 Edward could not shift his eyes from those violet eyes that were looking at him. This pale and beautiful face was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Since Edward did not shift his eyes, how would such a daring Dornish woman back down? She also fixed her gaze on Edward and started checking him with her eyes. She was pleased by what she saw, though. Edward, at this point, was a tall man with hardened muscles. He was handsome, not on Rhaegar's level, though. His dark hair and blue eyes were the pieces of evidence that he was a Baratheon with an Estermont's blood. The woman loved those pair of eyes. They were unique like hers, and she fell in love with them the moment her eyes saw them. "For you are?" asked the woman, since she saw that Edward would not speak if he stayed like that. She was interested to see someone with such good characteristics. The woman herself wanted to know the man, as she did not hear about someone like that in Starfall. And seeing the trained men behind his back, she could tell that he was from a large house. Edward did not answer for some time. If he could get out of his shock state and look at the woman's characteristics, he would be sure that the woman in front of him was from House Dane. Either she was Ashera or her sister Illyria. But looking at her age, which was similar to Edward's, she had to be Ashera Dane. 1 Edward was insulting the flies that followed after Ashera not long ago. Now, he was also a fly that fell for her eyes. Even his brain stopped processing more information and did not realize that he was talking to the fucking Ashera Dane herself. 7 You can call me Ed, said Edward without taking his eyes away from her. He only said these words after seeing that she was waiting for his answer. He gave her a nickname that he had never used, and he himself refused to let anyone call him by it. Now, Edward was asking her to call him Ed. Where's the fucking author? He should come and see Edward like that. 6 Are you going to stare like that for long? asked the girl with an amused smile after seeing that Edward did not shift his eyes from her since he pulled her cloak. She actually liked this man's character, even without knowing him. She was a little daring to tease a man, but she could not love him. 1 Edward nodded without a single thought and stayed like that for a few minutes before finally snapping of it. His men could not help themselves as they laughed at their lord, who nearly lost all reason after seeing the girl. 1 Edward gave them a death stare that meant they were going for a month of hell training. And if he heard them telling anyone about this event, they would have a whole year of hell training. And he could bet that they would not be able to stand for a month after that. Ashera could only laugh out hard after seeing the interaction between Edward and his men. She found that the man in front of her funny and liked his character more. She thought all the men with a good look and powerful body would be like her brother, stiff and without any sense of humor. After hearing her laughter, Edward stared at her again, and when he was going to enter the stare zone again, she slapped his chest. She did not want to stand the whole day waiting for him to wake up from his daze. "I am leaving. Hope to see you another time," said Ashera while trying to take her leave. She had sneaked earlier without telling anyone in her family nor the maids. She wanted to walk by the market and have some fun. She was going to be late if Edward took more of her time. Chapter 50, Taking Over Edward's Mind. Before she left, Edward caught her hands. How could Edward let her go? The girl was perfect, and she was his dream girl. Edward could do without any of the great house's daughters. He was able to build Storm's Land without any help. Yet, Edward would not stand to gain if he married a normal girl, but as if he needed those gains. He could do without them, but not without this girl. Fuck Lyanna Stark. Fuck Ashera Dane. If this girl was really from the Smaugfolk, Edward would not care. He was ready to abandon his visit to the Danes if this girl returned to Storm's Land with him. The moment Edward saw her, he was sure that she was the right one. So, he would prevent her from leaving, even if he had to kidnap her. He looked at her eyes, and when he was going to order his men to take her, he thought that she might hate him if he did something like that. 5 Am I going to see again? asked Edward while looking at her eyes. If she answered no, he was really going to kidnap her. 6 Ashera looked at his eyes and could not say no to him. She already liked his character and look, so why she would not be daring enough to sneak again and meet him? For all right. The day after tomorrow in the Star Inn. Not real. I would meet you there before the sun sets," said Ashera while escaping from Edward's hand and giving him a small kiss on his cheek. 6. Ashera was really daring to try something like that when she just saw the man. They did not have a proper conversation and even started with him, calling her a cunt, and was ready to teach her a lesson. Oh, fucking Dornish women. How could anyone deal with them? Maybe, only Tywin could humiliate the Princess of Dorne and refuse to marry his children to hers. Edward was stunned after the kiss and stood there for some minutes before snapping out of his daze. He was a little surprised by how daring the woman was. But, he liked it. This woman was his and would not allow anyone to even think about her. If he could not meet her in 2 days, he would send the Shadow Legion after her. He would not allow her to flee from him. Even if the Shadow Legion had to turn Starfall upside down, he would not care as long as they could find her. 6. Ashera was really a witch. She took over all Edward's thinking. His brain wanted to yell and tell him that this woman was Ashera and that Edward had fallen for this witch. But all Edward could think of was how beautiful her eyes were. He wanted the time to fly for the day after the following so that he could meet her. Edward came up with a plan. If he could meet this woman and persuade her to come with him, he would discard his meeting with House Dane, and he would fly back to Storm's End with her. 6. While Edward was walking in a daze, his men could help themselves from secretly laughing behind their lord's back. They wished they could tell all this to their brother, but the men knew that if they dared to even think of that, their lord was going to make them wish they were dead. 3. Edward went back to the inn, at which he was staying. And without a word, he went directly to his room. Edward could not take the witch from his thoughts. He hoped that with some sleep, he would recover too, but he could not even sleep. He kept thinking that the woman tricked him by making her go. She was not going to meet him. He kept thinking of different scenarios, as if he was planning to catch her if she did not appear. He turned the situation in his mind into a military one, when he had to go to war to take her. Then into a political one, where he had to make a deal with another house to get her. What the fuck is this? Be a man, dude. And don't act like a pussy. Are you going to get fucked up for a woman? TCH. 3. Edward spent the 2 days counting every day, every hour, every minute, and every second. He could not get his mind to concentrate on a different thing for, although Edward was a lot better, when compared to the last time when he met her, it was still not acceptable for his goal. This mindest would kill him one day. What if he married her and she got captured by an enemy? Would he act rashly and kill himself to save her? Would he cast his mind away at every situation that came to her? 5. That is not Edward that we used to know. We hope he can change his mindest or else he would be fucked by Tywin. 3. It was finally the time. The appointed time that Edward and Ashera agreed on. Edward was waiting in the Star Inn since morning. He had already moved to this inn after spending the first night in the other inn. He convinced himself that he was moving to this inn because she was better. We all made ourselves idiots and let him believe that we were not paying attention. Fuck man, love really kills the brain cells. 8. At the time of sunset, Edward saw the woman wearing a different cloak entering the inn. Her eyes scanned the inn before her eyes met with Edward's. When she saw him, she smiled under her cover. Ashera did not know why, but after leaving the man, she kept thinking about him. Even deep at night, she had wet dreams about him. Ashera was surprised as she did not really know the man and she only met him once. Would she really fall for a man who she had just seen? What was even weird about it was she regretted waiting for 2 days to meet him. Could not she just tell him to meet after a day? Why she had to make it this long? 7. That was why she was planning all day to meet him. She put from the perfume that she bought from Lys. When her sister Illyria saw her, she started asking her questions. Ashera was always daring and would not feel shy in front of her sister. Ashera started telling Illyria all that happened that day. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.